Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, your host, Maria, and with me today I have some distinguished co-hosts. The first is the normal, regular old schmegular old Will. He's rugged, he's handsome, we know him, we love him. But our distinguished, I was about to say judge, our distinguished co-host of the day is the lovely Lindbergh.
Subjects.
So royal.
And the book we're doing today is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Canonically, in our universe, the better Hilary. So this book was suggested by Lindbergh. She really liked this book. And this goes to show a little bit of the difference in my friends in life. Because Val is a friend I have who makes me read horrible books. And Lindbergh is a friend I have who makes me want to read wonderful books. We also read Between Two Fires and The Troop, which were delightful both. Some of you will be surprised to hear that I liked this book because this was a book club pick, or not, they didn't pick it, I picked it. It was a mid-month one. And everyone in our Patreon who read it with us hated it. And so I'm going to throw it to Lindbergh. Why did you like this book and what's the premise? Or premise and then why you liked it.
The premise of the book is that there was a rather famous person in history that you might have heard of. His name is Thomas Cromwell. He was the Chancellor to Henry VIII, you know, the king that killed all his wife, the British Tudor. And this book entails his early beginnings, his growing up and his rise to power in 1500s England. And the second two, this is the first book in a trilogy, so the second two books will detail his eventual decline and then his death. Delightful, eh?
History, man.
My history with this book is that once upon a time there was a man born called John Gwynne. He is a scholar of history, he likes fantasy, and he writes books. What is funny with John is that he is very virile, so he has fathered a number of offspring. And these two brothers have a booktube channel where they read historical fantasy, a lot of historical fantasy, and once I tuned in and they said, if you like fantasy, if you like history, if you like the Brits, read Wolf Hall. It's a fantastic book. So I did, and it was fantastic. And immediately after finishing the book, I thought, who can I inflict this book upon? Who has the stamina to get through all of this delightful, juicy gossip? And I was like, it's gotta be my favorite podcast. So here we are.
Okay, Maria, what were your thoughts on this book? Because I was utterly besotted by it. And you, I know, had a little bit more trouble with it at the beginning than I did. So what's your journey? What are your thoughts?
So my problems with the book initially had to do with a combination of some writing quirks the author has that becomes much more easier to deal with as the book goes on, and the way the audiobook narrator, who is, and I'm just going to preface this up front, an excellent, his voice work is beautiful. He does these stops in a sentence where it's almost like he's acting the scene and he's putzing about to find the piece of paper he's looking for, and he's stopped and you can almost hear paper rustling, and he does this noise with his mouth in between so he's excellent. But the way he finishes certain sentences, I don't know what he's saying. It just gets a little bit garbled at the end. So I had some frustrations in the beginning because I couldn't just listen to this book. I had to read it. And that for me is the only way I get through these books as quickly as I normally do, is because I just I'm listening to them all the time. So I was a bit frustrated with that, but from the start thought the writing was really good. And so overall, I really adored this book. It plays into a lot of just things, because it's gonna sound weird, but this book is real fucking slice of life, if the life you want a slice of is a British lawyer climbing the ranks of power in Henry VIII's court. If that's what you're looking for, this is slice of life as fuck. And specifically, I like the small moments in the book. A lot of my favorite stuff is the more mundane dealings of the Austin Friars crew, which is the house that our boy Cromwell lives in. I fucking love Thomas Cromwell. I fucking love him. And a problem I had with this book is I didn't ship him with anyone. I was like, my boy is too good for everyone. So I love Thomas Cromwell. Now, I will say, I understand the complaints levied at this book. Even Will, who does love this book, mentioned that the middle is a little long to get through. It's a little muddled. And part of this is because we're giving history, it's not just, here's a narrative arc to follow. It's, here's a narrative arc, and then also there's these other significant historical things that we're going to pop into, like little voyeurs, and then pop out of, and then pop into the whole time. And I understand why that is very exhausting. Chris M. in one of the comments I was reading said they would have enjoyed it more if it was short stories rather than a whole bound together book because of that. And I get that. Also, it's just, God, I love just hearing about the, like, intricacies of him having to fix shit, but it's not a one narrative arc story that you're following. The book even... If you know about this period of history, the title of this book is going to make you think things are going to happen in it that don't fucking happen. I got to the 2/3 point and I went, there's no way Anne's going down in this book. There's just not enough pages left.
In the beginning, I kept thinking, who is this grey little mousy child that everyone is being bitchy to? And it's like, oh my god, that's Jane Seymour. How old is she?
It's wild. And we'll talk about that in detail as we kind of go into it. So, like, the book is playing with your expectations, but it also is a historical, and Will mentioned this, it prizes the history over sometimes narrative oomph at multiple points. And I think that for a lot of people can be a bit tiring to get to. This bitch? Nom nom, ladies and gentlemen.
Tell me who's fucking who, I want to know.
Can I tell you, Rochford? What's her face? The real bitchy lady who talks all the shit about everyone? Rochford? Oh my god. What a cunt. I loved her. This book has so much gossip and drama and, like, small scale stuff. And it also, we've been whores the whole time. Humanity likes to spin this tale that this is the age of debauchery and we finally got to stuff. But let me tell you, there's a line in this book where it says, Anne has been promising him things that wouldn't result in a child. And I don't know about you fine people, but I was like, it's anal, right? Like, it has to be
yeah. We know how they do it over there.
The French are so debauched that they will have a man stand and then the woman puts her mouth on his penis. That is how debauched they are.
She takes it into her mouth.
Oh my god. So it's just hysterical because there's points where you're like, God, they were wild back then. And then you're like, oh man, all of our, like, and part of it is, this is a period of history before puritanicalism. It's before God, I don't want to say Christianity was sexy, but I want to say, like, the pre-Protestant era was sexier. Like, Catholicism has pomp and circumstance.
It has a lot of submerged eroticism in it.
Yes, it does. It's got a lot of guilt. Them Catholics love the guilt, and so we're in a stage of Christianity that has all the pomp and circumstance, and people aren't as puritanical as I think it's going to become. But anyway, so I found this book a lot of fun. I like but I can completely understand if you are looking for a more classic story. And I would say in a lot of ways, this is one of the most unconventional books we've read in how it is written, in the way we're following character arcs, and in Cromwell as well. A couple of people noted, what the fuck does Cromwell want at certain points? And at certain points you are like, what's our goal here, buddy? And towards the end, he kind of crystallizes it a little bit, but he feels like a guy taken upon tides whose goal is, I'm gonna just do the best of what everybody tells me to do. And part of that is, though, that's the evidence we have from history of how his life went. And so it's a crazy book. I love the crap out of it, but boy, oh boy, is it long. It's a long boy.
Yeah, it's a very long book.
I think the thing about it is that I really understand the criticism of it, but I think this is a case where, like, if it works for you, it works for you because it's good at doing the things you want, and it's not really interested in doing the things you don't. Something Lindbergh said to me was that, like, it's a very historicized, or it's very fictionalized history. It's not really historical fiction per se. And I'll use an example of when Wolsey, who is his like best bro at the beginning of the book, dies, Thomas Cromwell is not there for it. He hears it secondhand, and he actually hasn't interacted with Wolsey for like a good 100 pages or something. Not that many, but a lot, because this book is super long. And in a historical fiction, you would have him be at his deathbed, because that is a dramatically satisfying scene. It ties in. It doesn't really matter, honestly, that he wasn't there. It's not like historically he was in like Rome at the time or something like that. It really would be pretty easy to fudge, but the book doesn't do that. And it's still effective because Hilary Mantel is an insanely talented writer. Like, she really is. But like, that's the thing, is this book is interested in what were the lives of people in history like? Not necessarily can I craft a more abstracted version of their lives to tell people. And again, I think I understand people who this didn't click for. I don't know if this was not an audiobook, if I could have gotten through it, but I just loved listening to this. I was just like, oh yay, I get to listen to more Wolf Hall and just chill here. And like Marie says, it's very slice of Tudor execution life. Like, that is very much the feeling of it.
Slice of life and death in 15th century England.
Oh, do we have a title?
It hits that sweet, juicy telenovela spot where you can just lie back and just go, ooh, what are these bitches gonna get up to?
And yet it's also cozy. Like, I don't want to say this book is a cozy read. It's not, but there's parts of it that are cozy as fuck.
And the book is so funny, too.
This is a funny fucking book. Even the people that didn't like it acknowledged how fucking hysterical this book is. And how it pokes, there's literally something that you get immediately with this book is there's a bajillion people named the same name. Like, throughout. Like, the British in the 1500s, specifically the period we're in, Thomas, Henry, and not even that many Williams. I would say William was not one of the ones. Harry, there was another one. There was just a ton of Charles. When I tell you, and there's a scene where there are 3 or 4 Thomases in it, and the cardinal says, Thomas, do this, and the book goes, nobody knew which Thomas he was talking to.
Yeah, because there's like 5 Thomases in the room, and everyone's like,
which one? And it's just, so the book kind of pokes fun at itself, but it is hysterical. This woman writes dialogue that is snappy, funny, and like, and also short. She knows how to get away with a lot with short responses. There are points where Cromwell just answers in one word. Like, somebody asks him a question, he says one word. Somebody asks another question. And it's just this like buildup of hilarity in how the scene works that is just masterful. I definitely think some of the dialogue scenes in this would be fantastic for a critique stream. I'm gonna just throw that out there.
I've told Lindbergh I'm okay with doing 6 months of critique streams on this book alone. She just needs to pick them.
It might be in the works already.
Lindbergh, what did you feel like this book did well, and like in terms of the criticism around it? Like, what were your thoughts?
Okay, guys, I'm gonna tell you, it's been so hard to not just completely drown the channel in like me fighting against you guys. I'm like, nah, you're wrong, and this is why. Because this book just tickles me so much. I think I am rather interested in this period of history, but what really tickles me with it is that it takes history and then it adds all the character. Like, you get all the funny character interactions. You get to sort of feel as if you're a fly on the wall in the Tudor household, and you're like, oh, who was Henry really? Because he's such an iconic person, and you're like, how could this king be, how could he be so mean and cruel, and he kills all his wives? Like, how does he justify that to himself? And Hilary Mantel clearly had the same questions as I did, so she was like, I'm just gonna devote my entire life to answering these questions, and then I'm gonna write my magnum opus about it. And that's where I am with the book. I think it does dialogue fantastically. Like every single character, because as Maria mentioned earlier, there were some confusions for people where there are some narrative quirks, where basically anytime Hilary writes he, unless she specifies someone else, it's usually Cromwell she's talking about or referring to. And I personally don't have an issue with this because I feel like every single character's voice is so distinct that I know who is talking almost the moment they start talking. Or I will know by the time they finish their sentence.
I also didn't have problems with that, though that is, I think, a very valid problem with the book because a lot of people have mentioned that they lost track of who was talking. I sometimes lost track of like minor characters because I'm so bad with names. But like I didn't have an issue with it.
For me, what it wasn't in the dialogue. I found it easier, especially as the book went on to deal with the dialogue. The problem was in a paragraph where she was describing actions, or it was the he thinks or he says, because sometimes, and something I didn't notice when I was just reading it, and this is something Will might not know when I was just listening to it, is a lot of the dialogue is not actually in quotations. She's just saying he says and then the thing, so it's in the narrative voice and not in the character's voice necessarily. The voice actor will read those lines most of the time in the character's voice.
I actually did notice that because he reads them slightly differently, but I can imagine that, yeah.
So with that, and because there was one paragraph, like, and I remember the paragraph where he was originally the cardinal, then in the middle it was Cromwell, and then at the end it was Cavendish, and at no point did Mantel tell you who the fuck she was referring to in those moments. And so once you get into it, I would say about a third of the way through that stopped becoming an issue for me because you just become so familiar with the characters' voices and vibes and how they interact that it stops being as much of an issue. But initially, especially with the audiobook narrator swallowing his words, there was several scenes that I had to listen to multiple times and then just ended up having to read. And because I like the audiobook narrator so much, I would read it and listen at the same time. I was at 2.5 speed at the end of this so that the book was keeping up with how fast I read in my head.
I do not read that fast.
It's weird. If you have the audiobook narrator reading, you can read very quickly with your eyes keep up. I don't know what it is, but if I have the audiobook and I'm reading, I can go wickedly fast. It's crazy. But anyway, and so I will say that there is credence to that, and it's going to be a bit of a barrier of entry, but if you can get past, and this is the problem, if you can get past that and that he and confusion thing stops being a problem, you still have to then, because at that point, you're in the part of the book where it's going to start popping in and out of small historical events in tying into the greater, because like the first, I want to say third of the book has a very clear arc and timeline that is jumping back and forth, and it's basically the Wolsey arc. Old Cardinal Wolsey, who is best boy, and history did my man so dirty. I love him so much.
Oh, so dirty. Oh my god, thank you, Maria.
I love Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey's my favorite.
I do, and when he's dead and everyone's being flippant about it, I'm like, you fuckers are gonna burn in hell for this.
There's that one scene where Cromwell walks into a room and Wolsey's ghost is there talking to him, and I'm like, Wolsey, we need you. And then every time when somebody was like, I wish the Cardinal was still alive, I was like, now you do? Bitch!
Yeah! These people!
But after Wolsey dies, I would say is the point at which the book loses, because it's really focused on what's up with Wolsey for that first chunk. And then after that, so even if you hang around to the point where that stops becoming an issue for you, Wolsey's like, and I would argue in some ways, it's one of the strongest parts of the book, narratively, if we're looking at a clear, classic expectations for a story. And so once that ends, I think a lot of people struggle, if you're not here for a slice of Tudor life book, and coming into a historical novel, I don't think that's what most people are looking for. So I get it. I understand. Mm-hmm. But again, Nom 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 nom.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
feelings
Nom
too.
nom nom nom.
I saw one of the comments in the book club chat saying that at the time Wolsey dies, they're like, I didn't really see how Cromwell rose into Henry's esteem by himself. And I'm like, that is a bit of a shift in the narrative, because once Wolsey dies, Thomas thinks he's gonna get the axe pretty much, and instead Henry invites him in, and he's like, "You're quite a bad person, aren't you?" And Cromwell's like, "Yep, yeah." And Henry's like, "Oh, you don't deny it." Thomas is like, "No, I'm bad." And Henry's like, "Oh, I like that. Why don't you be my counselor?" And that's basically how it happens. And I can see how if you expect the narrative to give you a sort of driven story where Cromwell sees his master go down and he sees that it was unjust, it hurts his feelings, and he's like, "I'm gonna get to the very top and I'm gonna get my revenge on these people." That would be a traditional storyline. And instead, Thomas just kind of slides into King Henry's graces sideways by virtue of that. That's just how they did it. It mentions at some point in the book that that's just usually how they handle it. Everyone was trained by Cardinal Wolsey, and then they rose to Henry's staff.
It's also like, we don't waste good workers. Like, if you're a good bureaucrat, I think the big thing for our boy Cromwell is he's just a fixer. You got a problem, he's gonna make that problem fucking go away. And we don't waste fixers.
I think the other thing about it is that, and this is something that I thought was very obvious, but is never really stated in the novel, is that Henry is a child, and Wolsey was his only real figure of familiarity, and so he needs a replacement for Wolsey, not just administratively, but emotionally, and Cromwell is a dude that he likes. He likes Cromwell for whatever reason, and one reason he mentions is that he was so loyal to Wolsey, and, Henry's a bit of a narcissist, so he really wants loyalty from others, even if he doesn't necessarily give it.
I bet Sigmund Freud wet himself when he read the story about Henry, because he was like, "Oh, the Oedipus complex, oh!" Because, the son grew to envy the father, and then he slew the father, and then he wanted the father back. It's pretty much that. He's like, "Cromwell, will you be my daddy?"
I need a dad.
He wanted the woman his father and his older brother had, and then he had her, and he was like, "Ugh, she's too much like my mom." Like, yeah, no, there's a lot going on there.
Don't call her my wife, she's my sister. So I think you can tell we like this. This is going to be one of those videos where we talk a lot. Now, I have my things that I will talk about that I think could have been done better, the ways, but again, I think Will's point is correct, which is this book did the thing it wanted to do, and it either is something you're going to enjoy or it's something you're not going to enjoy. So I understand disliking this book, but I think for the most part, it really nails what it's going for. I think the worst I could say is some of the middle, for expediency's sake, could be cut out. But even someone, and this is what I mean by it's either for you or not. One of our, I think it was Fern, read the abridged version and still had issues that other people had with the long version. And so again, it's just going to be for you or not. And I don't think, like, it completely makes sense why it wouldn't be for some people. I'm part of the lucky group that's like,
Yeah. If you don't want dramatized history with all its abruptness and all its inconsistencies and just general weirdness and randomness, you're not going to like this book. But if you do like that, if you just want to watch people be bitchy towards each other, and that's this book. Go read it.
I have two master storytellers here, so I keep having to think about who I'm going to throw this to. Maria, because I think you haven't. Who is Thomas Cromwell, and how does his life start?
Our boy Thomas. My boy. I love him. He is the son of a butcher, or not a butcher, excuse me, that's Wolsey. He's the son of a blacksmith, but not just any blacksmith. He's rocking his life in Putney, and by rocking, I mean he's being rocked every day because his father's abusive and beats the shit out of him. And this book opens with him near dead. His dad, it literally opens with his dad just beating the absolute crap out of him. And then he, like, crawls his way to his sister and brother-in-law's house and is like, and they're like, oh man, dad sucks. Would if we could stop this from happening. And his father is such a powerful figure that everyone's so scared of that the only real option, because, like, his sister and brother-in-law could take him in and be like, you live with us now, don't worry. But his dad would still come and beat the shit out of them, too. Like, he's just a bruiser of a man. And we hear that our boy Tom is also a bruiser. He's beefy. If he hit his dad back with as much force as his dad went for him, he'd get him. He'd take him down, but his dad is sneaky and comes up from behind with shit. So, like, Tom doesn't even have time to square up, okay? He doesn't even have the time. And so they're like, sorry, Tom, I know you're still half dead because you were beat, but you gotta go on the road. Here's some money. Become a soldier. Fuck off. And so, thus begins Thomas Cromwell's, at around the age of 15, he thinks, he doesn't know his birth date, his adventuring off into the world to kind of figure out who he is. He is a sailor for a time. He's a soldier for the time, but for the French, which is the wrong side of the war to be fighting on. But he needed someone. He was like, I'll take whoever says yes. Young Thomas Cromwell is just here he wants a job, he wants a purpose, and he's just gonna rack about until he finds it. He also gets into some wool trading and eventually ends up, because the book time skips, he goes off to do his thing. It time skips to him working as the Cardinal Thomas Wolsey's man. This begins the era of too many Thomases in the book, where you're like, and this is another thing the writer does, the author does, that some people found issue with. She'll start the first 5 pages of a character calling him one thing. It'll just be the Cardinal, the Cardinal, the Cardinal. And then all of a sudden, she goes, Wolsey. And you and the reader, if you didn't brush up on this era beforehand, go, who the fuck is Wolsey? And then you're like, oh, it's Thomas Wolsey, that Cardinal. And then you have to put it together. But she'll change. She'll go Cardinal, Wolsey, and Thomas to refer to the same guy within the same scene. And you're like, but there's another Thomas here. Which one? And so that kind of stuff. And so what I had to do was I had to stop and refresh myself on a lot of the big names so that when she said, like, Chancellor and then switches to the name that the Chancellor is, I wasn't like, who the fuck's this guy? So I would recommend, if you don't know this era of history, don't do it.
I wish there was a character guide somebody had made up for this, because that would have actually helped immensely. I was watching some of the clips from the BBC production of it, and, like, it's easier there because you can recognize them by face, even if they are a bunch of old, crusty English guys. But, like, it's easier to remember because especially some of the, like, I don't remember the name of the guy with the eye patch. I know who he was, but, like, I don't remember his name.
I think that was Brandon.
No, Brandon is the cool, rebellious friend of Henry. Though, actually, to be honest...
What do you mean cool and rebellious? He's the oaf friend of Henry.
He's played by Henry Cavill in The Tudors.
He is such an oaf.
And Henry Cavill is a friend of this channel because he's a Custodes player.
So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages of characters that it lists in... and because it says the Seymour family at Wolf Hall, the ambassadors, and it lists all the ambassadors, at Hatfield, at Calais, the clergy, at court. So we get a lot of, so they have it if you have the actual book or ebook.
Chris M is mentioning that in the chat. By the way, guys, usually during the mid-month books, And the book club live streams, we try to get you to give us money by putting your comments on screen. We don't have that tech today, so if we are reading a comment from the chat, we'll just read it out loud. One thing, Science Fantastic has said it's a historical soap opera. It's really not, because soap opera kind of implies a certain amount of drama and a focus on drama, where that's not really what this is doing. If anything, the drama is very kind of in the undertones of the book and is very kind of naturalized and organic to what's going on with the characters.
The thing is that this period of history was extremely dramatic. There was a lot of major events going on. So it's not like a sitcom or a drama, whereas if this was a television show and they did a what did he call it?
Adaptation?
Soap opera.
A soap opera.
If this was done as a soap opera, they would invent lots of little intrigues that are juicy for the reader, the watcher, but that don't actually impact the flow of history. Whereas this book is it has a very high fidelity to history. And the thing is that people were just bonkers.
The other thing is, if this got turned into a TV show or a movie, they would have to cut a lot. Characters would have to get squished together because there are several characters that do similar things, and you would just cut them down for cast time. You would also have to move things around for dramatic effect. It's like Will said, you would have Cromwell at Wolsey's death, or you would have it played as if, like, he's talking to Wolsey in his dream, in his head as he processes stuff, and Wolsey's like, Cromwell, and like the last thing he says is Cromwell as he dies.
Wolsey would have to hang around like a ghost in the corner of the rooms to sort of guide Cromwell through life, so the watcher could feel like their favorite character is still with us.
So they could keep using the actor.
Like Ghost Harry and Dexter. It would be Ghost Wolsey, and so it would do, I think, I think like the HBO version of this show would, as a classic narrative, be more satisfying to a lot of the people that have the issues we have. I think it would clean it up for them. It would be a tighter story, and they would force in some arcs that aren't here, because it's history. Like, the historical people weren't arcing through life; they were aging.
None of us arc through life, really.
Yeah, they weren't arcing through life. They weren't like, I have a real problem with this, and over the course of this years, I'm going to learn how I was wrong. And like, it's not to say that people don't learn they were wrong in life, but you've met people that go through their entire lives never thinking a single thing they did was wrong.
People make the same mistakes all through life, and then they die. That's basically how we live.
Well, and also, like, you don't necessarily get dramatic, satisfying conclusions to things. Like, I had a person who wronged me quite a lot, and I never got a resolution to that. Like, I never met them again. I never got to have revenge or a moment of closing. It's just like, okay, life kind of goes on.
It's the wound that keeps bleeding.
This is the problem. That exact thing, Will, is the problem with nonfiction. I have read 2 nonfiction books where I was like, I can't wait for this person to eat shit. Yeah. And they don't, because that's just not what happened. If anyone's wondering, The Feather Thief and Unmasking Alice, let me tell you, those books broke me. I was so angry.
I should say that there is a BBC adaptation of this that I don't think any of the 3 of us have watched.
What?
No, I've heard it's rather excellent. It has a very high rating. If you were interested in that, as opposed to reading this book, go to that. It's a great way to get the history, but with some slimming down.
I could also see it as a good gateway of like, okay, now I understand. Now I have more visualization of who people are, and I want to take it slower through the actual book and get more details.
Yeah, it can help you put faces to all the names, like which is Thomas.
And the thing is also, I think this book is one of those books that takes advantage of the medium in that way of like, I'm sure the series is good, and I would be curious to see how it relates, but so much of what this book does that's well, I think is done through prose. Like, so for example, because I've watched some clips of it, I haven't watched the whole thing, but the guy they have cast as Cromwell, he says the same lines from the book, but he just kind of looks confused and old. Whereas Cromwell, like, I have such a vivid feeling of who he is in the book that is not
Cromwell is such a cheeky cunt.
Oh.
We're so far into this, but I can swear now. But yeah, Cromwell is such a cheeky cunt. And if the actor doesn't deliver it right, it's just not gonna fly.
And also, you need to have someone who's a fucking bear. Like, the thing about Cromwell is he, throughout the book and history, he was just like a wall. He was built like a brick shithouse, you know? You gotta look at him and be like, that guy's one of the king's counselor? That guy? And if you don't have that, you've done it wrong. One of my favorite points reading this was getting to the point where they talk about his portrait, and I stopped and I looked up the portrait.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, Tommy. Tommaso, what happened? That's a terrible portrait. And he's just like a wall of black and a squat face.
They do mention many times he is not a good looking dude, which is so funny.
Even his, like, I think it's his niece is like, the painter did you dirty. Like, it's worse than normal. It's just so funny.
It's so funny. And Cromwell's like, shit, is that me? I guess I've been seeing myself as the young man I was in Italy.
Basically, what happens is that, once he comes back to... So, I don't remember exactly where Maria was at, but basically, chronologically with Cromwell, he went to serve with the French. He was like, okay, why don't I get into logistics with the army? So he knows a lot about cloth and stuff, and he kind of made he cut his teeth in Italy. And then he goes back to England, and in England, he's going to go into business, and there's this old guy whose business is not doing well, and so he helps him out, and he's like, I like your daughter. I want to marry her. This seems like a good business to take over. And the guy calls down his wife or his daughter and is like, hey, do you want to marry him? And she's like, oh, yeah, you did not pick him for his looks. But yeah, okay, this seems like a good business partnership to enter into.
Immediately, you can tell that they're the same kind of pragmatists. They're like, oh, he's not much of a looker, but, you know, he's got to have some good points, eh? They basically drew up a contract to get married, and they're like, yeah, we love each other now.
They do. You hear their meet cute, and you're like, that wasn't much of a meet cute, but
yeah.
God damn it, do Liz, Cromwell, and Tom love each other. And part of the reason why I don't ship him with anyone else is because I just love him and Liz so much. Like, the first scene you get with him and Liz is so beautiful and encapsulating, because you get a scene of them together before you hear their origin story. This author does that a lot, where she will provide you a scene, and then she's going to go back and give you the context to it. And sometimes ages later in like a kind of flashback scene. It also plays around with timelines a little bit. And he has a meeting with Wolsey talking about how the king wants to stop being married to Catherine and wants to marry someone else. And Wolsey's like, God damn it. what a bitch. I'm going to try to deal with it here, but we also have to do it in Rome. And like, he's trying to get this done, even though you can tell that Wolsey himself is like, it would be so much easier if the king could just get the fuck over himself. But Tom goes back to his house, and he sits down, and she opens the door, and she's like, how are you? And he's like, fine. And she was like, how's the meeting with the cardinal? And he's like, fine. And she's like, you hungry? And he's like, yeah. She's like, you want this to drink? And he was like, yeah. And then they just sit down, and like, she doesn't, even though he's giving her these like one word terse answers, it is with love. Like, there is a familiarity between these two people where she is not taking any of his responses badly, and she's like sitting, and then she just sits there and sews with him because she has her own little sewing business where she makes shit for rich people, and she's just this practical, and the entire interaction is so practical and so mundane, and it is a beautiful kind of dropping you into what the life of these two people like and how much they understand each other, that what could have been, if you wrote it slightly differently, a scene where Cromwell's being an absolute ass, it isn't that way because they know each other so well, because they don't need a ton of words to get across the meaning. And it is so fantastic. Also, they read a letter from their son, Gregory, and it is hysterical because it says nothing. And it's something that's going to come up later in the book where Gregory continues to say nothing in his letters.
The other thing is, it's such a good example of, and this is probably a good place to talk about it, Cromwell is a very distant character from the reader. You're very much on his side, and you kind of understand why he thinks, but emotionally, he's very far away while at the same time being compelling. And this is done through a few tricks, I think, on the part of the writer. So, like, one of them, for example, is, like Maria said, there's a cadence to their conversations that has a familiarity and a dryness of, like, these are both kind of funny, practical people, but they still really like each other. And another is that, like, at one point, his wife, when they're in bed, she goes, like, who's the other woman? And she's talking about Henry. And his immediate reaction, though, is, oh, God, does she think I'm having an affair? How can I prove to her I don't have an affair? And that's, like, both a very practical way of dealing with it, but it also shows how much he does care. And, like, those small moments really help. One of the things is when you turn down how close you are to the reader, you make them try. A lot of times the reader will be like, okay, I'm going to try to glean whatever I can from the few details I have because I have so few. And this is one of those things. The reader is kind of like chasing after understanding the character a little bit. And like these are... Maria's right. I really loved his relationship with Liz. And honestly, a big part of this book is going to be him being sort of the patriarch of his family and taking care of the people who are his family or his wards, his sort of extended household. And like that is the coziest part because you can tell how cozy he feels, how he wants kids around when he's sad, when he realizes there aren't going to be any kids around after a certain point.
And their household is so benign. Their whole... It's cozy in their home. They don't have conflict. They understand each other. Everyone works together. They don't talk, but they sit and they enjoy each other's company, and it's so sweet.
And really he allows the women in his life to have a sense of agency, involvement in his affairs. Like they're constant. Like there's literally a scene where he's like, no, you guys shouldn't be dealing with this. And his two nieces are like, nah, this is what you've raised us to do. Like this is our job. Like this is family business. We are in the family business. I'ma fucking watch that girl get murdered. Weird reference, but it happens.
Well, there's a part where like he's like, you should not be talking behind your husband's backs like that. And she's like, here in Pious Friars or whatever it's called, like, yeah, that's not how we women do it here.
Austin Friars.
This will be the start of me not getting it right. But you get a sense of like, yeah, no, people in his orbit, like they really respect him, but he also allows them to talk. At one point to send secret letters, he gets his youngest daughter to make a weird stitch on how the messages are closed. He is a very practical guy and he'll kind of include them in his schemes, but he also is very like, okay, I need to get good marriages for you guys. And like that is just, it's a warmth to his character that in another book might be like I'm thinking of like the TV show You, where the main character is a terrible stalker, but there's this weird plot line where he takes care of a kid in an abusive situation with his father, and I'm like, this is just here to kind of counterbalance how terrible of a person he is for like sympathy
that
points.
TV show did not know how to not cross the line into making the weirdo creep killer into someone you're supposed to like. How not to do an antagonist main character.
Yeah, and so this book, like, his home life is a part of who he is, and it feels very organic, and it does make him more likable, and you do feel that kind of comfort there that he feels, which helps you kind of, like, bond.
Yeah. I would read a slice of life fan fiction that is just hours at Austin Friars. Like, just... here's what's happening at Austin Friars. And, like, his nieces, and... God, what I would give for fan fiction if his daughter hadn't died. And
man, I don't want to talk about it.
We get that scene, and then it kind of jumps us ahead, where we just had that scene with Wolsey and being like, I gotta fix all of this and try to get the king his second marriage because he doesn't like, this person. And then we get a scene that shunts us ahead a couple of years, where Wolsey is being evicted from his home. And it's like, you are accused of treason. God, no, Wolsey, we're taking you out of here. We're looking through all of your shit. We're taking your vestments. Fuck off. And Cromwell has to be like, okay, what are we going to do in this situation? Because he's the fixer. They end up going somewhere else. And he has to
these were all gifts from the king, and now he's taking them back.
They go off somewhere else, and one of the things we get here, because the plot of this book is very much the history. If you go and you read the history, but there's little moments where the author is kind of playing into some stuff, and one of the things we get is that Henry is regularly of two minds, where he can't decide or what he's doing and what he wants in the short term is kind of going against how he feels in long term stuff. And the book lays it out for you perfectly, where Wolsey's getting kicked out of his house. He's out of favor with the king. He's on a barge. People are yelling at him and calling him names. And Wolsey's like,
yeah, they're taking his things. They're taking his clothes
and
just kicking him out.
Yeah, and sending him to a house that doesn't even have like a bed in it. And he's like, how did this happen? I've worked so hard for the people and I've tried to do so much. And then as they kind of get off the barge, this guy comes up, Norris. Yeah, I think it's Norris. Henry Norris.
The ass wiper.
The ass wiper. We hate Henry Norris. We do not like Henry Norris. He's there for a lot of our boy Cromwell's not favorite moments. We don't like him. But anyway, he's there and he's like, here's a ring from the king. He actually does like you. He's just pretending he doesn't. And this is one of those moments where you realize that the king is it's kind of the first indication that the king is a bit of a child, where he can be led by other people. And if he thinks, you know, a short-term thing will get him what he wants, but he still holds out hope for a different outcome. And because what has happened is the woman the king wants to marry is pissed off that the cardinal hasn't made it happen yet. And even though he has actively been trying, there is this counter-narrative that he hasn't. But also, there are people who think he's too powerful and too well-liked, because Wolsey was a very well-liked cardinal. He was out there with the people like, hello, people!
He was the common people's man. He did so much for common people, and that really pissed off a lot of the powerful nobility. So they have just been waiting for this to happen. So while Wolsey has been out trying to... Because the thing is, what Wolsey was tasked with was to invent a cause for Henry's marriage to be nullified, because they have been married for ages. I mean, there is no issue, but he has to invent a cause. So Cardinal Wolsey has been like journeying through the world to go down and talk to the cardinals in Rome to get them to see that, oh, possibly she wasn't a virgin when she came into Henry's bed, and that means that he has been cursed by God, because to marry your brother's wife in this era counts as incest. And it's a deadly sin.
But to have sex with your wife's sister, not a deadly sin. We'll get to that later. I'm just going to leave that there.
Doing the nasty is fine.
This book is very kind of interested in the legitimacy of power in terms of where in, like, because a big thing in it will be like, does the King of England rule in England, or does the Pope's law supersede his? And in this case, at one point later on, they say that like one of the problems with Wolsey is that he really was one of the big powers outside of Henry, and Henry didn't like
Cardinal
that.
Wolsey also was sort of destined, and people thought he was going to be elected to the next Pope. But then, because he is sort of a man of the people, they didn't bribe the right people, so he didn't get elected to Pope. So he is a big power, and a lot of people are threatened by it.
Well, and he's also starting off some of the... we'll talk more about the religious stuff in a minute, but very quickly, for people who don't remember, because a lot of us kind of remember that Henry VIII had a bunch of wives, but we don't remember why exactly and stuff. At this point, like they were saying, he had married Catherine of Aragon, who was initially married to his brother, but the thing was like, oh, his brother never bedded her, so it's not really, and they had a papal dispensation.
And his brother died shortly after their wedding. Yeah,
after the wedding. Like, I think it was like a month or so. Like, it was real short, 3 weeks.
Yeah,
like
and the brother was 16 when he married Catherine, so there's some confusion on whether they did or not.
Yeah. Right now, the Henry likes to sleep around a lot, and he right now there's Anne Boleyn who is like, he and her are very entranced with each other, and she wants to be queen.
She has caught his eye.
Yes, exactly, very elegant. One thing I should have mentioned before this, sorry guys, we're going through like three things. I'm actually not super interested in the historiosity, accuracy of this book. We should state that right off the bat. I know some of the stuff from that time period, but like in general, historical books, I feel like unless they go very far out of their way in terms of accuracy, like if you write a book about Christopher Columbus and you don't mention that he used to cut off the limbs of natives and then make them wear them rotting around their necks and did awful things to them, like that's a thing that you know, the historiosity and accuracy is going to conflict with your ability in the book. I'm mostly interested in what the book has to say on its own in sort of a self-contained universe, so to speak. So like one of the things is that the idea that Anne Boleyn got Henry interested in her because she wouldn't let him sleep with him. It's actually not from that time period. That starts coming up later on, and this book subscribes to that. But I actually think it's interesting that the book subscribes to that in terms of what it's saying about like women and feminism and power in Henry.
Which version does the book subscribe to in your?
The book subscribes to the idea that Anne Boleyn wouldn't let Henry bed her until they were married. And so she was kind of like one of the moving forces of like, no, I need to be queen and married before I'll let you hit the coochie.
I won't let you ruin my value if we're not married.
And that, again, that idea, which is very common now, is like not really ever mentioned in the texts at the time.
Well, obviously not. But we have to understand that the limit of a woman's power was her virginity at the time. So it makes perfect sense.
Yes and no. I mean, there's also, for example, one of the mentions, it's mentioned that Mary at one point gossips that her sister, like, Henry really likes kissing her nipples. And that's actually taken from a letter that Henry wrote, that's one of the things he misses when she's gone, except he calls them Dougies, because that's what they called boobs back then. But like, so there's a lot of small things the author sprinkles in there that are really kind of cool little historical Easter eggs, but aren't super necessary. Anyway, sorry guys. Again, Anne Boleyn, she wants to be married, but to do that, you know, Catherine of Aragon they have to find some kind of an excuse because back then divorce is not a thing.
She has to go away, basically.
They have to void the marriage. Divorce isn't an option, so they have to make it seem like the marriage was never real. So Harry starts being like, she's my sister, she's my brother's wife, she's my sister. Don't refer to her as my wife, even though we've had sex a lot and she's had a child for me. And because that's the other problem. And this is the one problem Wolsey is interested in as a fixer for him, is that he's like, we don't have a male heir. The men don't love when a woman becomes, in her own right, the only one to carry the bloodline.
She would be a weak ruler, and she would open the door for other people who think they have a claim to the throne of England. And they have just closed a long historical period of wars for claims to the throne. So Wolsey's like, we can't have that. We must have order, and preferably a male heir.
Similar rhetoric as in House of the Dragon, where they're like, Rhaenyra, you don't get to be queen because people won't like that. And then people will have civil war. And that's where Wolsey is really interested, is he, from a political perspective, is like, I don't think people are going to look at Princess Mary and be like, oh, look at our powerful queen. And also just, you know, misogyny during the time period. We can't let, nobody wants just it's a last resort. Like, it's a real last resort to put just a woman up on the throne and be like, look, she's a woman, queen, with no king, or whoever she's married to isn't a king. So they don't want to do that. And that's why Wolsey is kind of entertaining this and is genuinely, despite other people saying he wasn't trying, he is genuinely trying to get this to kind of happen. So it is a mix within the book historically of issues that are kind of coming to the head. Henry wants his dick wet, specifically by Anne. People are worried about succession. We don't want the Plantagenets to be like, here, baby, like, stay away, Plantagenets. Fuck off.
Okay, so one question I actually had is, how much did you guys think that Henry not wanting to divorce Catherine of Aragon was a matter of his religious feelings versus wanting to marry Anne versus political? Because I got the sense that the book doesn't, like, Henry is obviously a child, and some of the things he wants later on are because of that. But, like, there's more going on, I think, than just, or I got the impression than just he wants to get his dick wet. Like,
I'd say there's a very strong undercurrent of the fact that Henry can't feel like a man until he has
a son.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
That I think is one of the strongest things. Is Henry wants a boy. Henry wants
he needs a boy.
he needs a little son, I think, and because the thing is, Henry is a religious man. One of the things we're told is that he actually has read like a lot of stuff, but he's a bit slave to his whim. But he is also aware of the political climate, and the role his dad had, and the what he is taking on as his father's son. And the continuing of this line. There's a lot of... And so the idea of having a line to continue is very important. And so I think you're completely right, Will. That is don't smack your mic, Maria. That is 100% one of the things that is coming into play with this kind of setup. And for a lot of reasons, I don't think the minute details of this book as far as plot are worth going into. But this book carries us through... Wolsey's downfall, which is tragic because we love him. He is very funny. I love that he pretends that Cromwell wants strawberries in the middle of like winter and before
and he invents stories like, oh, Cromwell's got bastards all over Europe.
Yeah,
he's got a son in every haven.
It's so great because that's not who Cromwell is, but you kind of love him. But watching the politics of him falling out of favor, how people are using Wolsey as a straw man for whatever their issue is. He is now taking it. The church is too powerful. It's Wolsey. The monks and the monasteries have been hurt. Wolsey, because one of the things Wolsey was doing was taking money from certain monasteries that weren't really doing anything and putting it toward colleges for common people. Because the other thing we haven't mentioned, Wolsey was a butcher's son. He is like Cromwell. They were commoner boys.
They are progressives in an extremely ultra-conservative world.
It was very important to Wolsey. Book Wolsey, and also this is something that like historical Wolsey also did, was creating these colleges for common people to get educated and kind of rise in the ranks of the clergy and all of that jazz. And so like if you are interested in the papal money going where it should, you don't want it going to Wolsey's colleges. Fuck Wolsey. You're Anne Boleyn and you want to marry the king and you feel Wolsey standing in your way. Fuck Wolsey. However, like whatever cause people had to be pissed off, they just kind of threw it as a charge at Wolsey to the point where there was no way for him to climb out of it. And there's a sense that because he dies before he's actually executed because of his health. And there's a sense that like he would have been executed, but had that not happened, eventually he would have risen back in favor as people kind of got past things. Not that it would have happened. They would have killed him. It was going to happen anyway.
They sensed Henry getting a little bit confused and maybe missing Wolsey. So immediately they made sure that they charged him with treason. And the shock made the old man ill, so he died. But he would have been executed and they would have gotten rid of their problem.
It is through trying to defend Wolsey that our boy Cromwell gets to court because he doesn't want people talking shit about his beloved master without someone there to defend him. So that's why he's not there at Wolsey's death, because he's in court every day fighting for Wolsey. He's doing the good stuff. And this puts him in contact with Henry, with Anne Boleyn for the first time. With all these other power players, and this is how he kind of gets his start, because they see he's very reasonable. He's a practical man. He's and the way he defends Wolsey, everybody, like, despite the fact that he is defending a man that they're all like, yeah, we've said he's treasonous. They're like, but I like the cut of your jib, Cromwell. you're a good guy. And so that's the first chunk of the book is Wolsey dying, Cromwell coming into play in court and becoming someone that Henry calls when he has a nightmare. That's not me being sarcastic and making a ha-ha at the book. That actually happens in the book.
Yep.
And we also get introduced to the next kind of archbishop / eventually like big religious person we deal with, which is Cranmer. There's a ton. There's a lot of this book has so many characters. Like, it's just you throw a stone, you hit 5 characters. Like, it's just...
You hit 5 Thomases.
Yes, you hit 5 Thomases. You throw another stone, you hit 3 Henrys, and a guy named Harry.
I think probably the way to do this then is we'll talk about like each of the characters that are kind of introduced in section 2 and what we thought about them. But the other thing that's important that happens, I think in section 1 and maybe early in section 2, is that Liz, Cromwell's wife, dies.
Yes, it happens in section 1, but they hide it. Like, they kind of bury the lead on her death.
The sweating sickness hits London.
It takes Liz, and it is, when I tell you, this author shines in the small moments.
Yeah.
This death scene is so beautifully sad, quiet, and tragic.
The way he comes back and he knows, so he tucks in his daughters first, and they're like, "Who are you?" Because he's not around a lot, and then he goes with his wife, and they like, everybody's like, "We looked for you, but we couldn't find you."
Not just that, but when he leaves in the morning and he thinks his wife has gotten up after him, and he sees out of a corner of his eye her white cap, and it's almost sold as if like it was the beginning of her spirit kind of like bidding adieu. But it is just so sad. And the other thing that Lindbergh, I think you were getting into, is the sweating sickness is mentioned multiple times before this in the book.
I think it's just a recurring plague too, because it comes up a few times more, and then I know Gregory will end up dying of it after Cromwell's death, like 11 years later. And then also it claims Thomas's daughters, his 2 daughters, especially Liz, who wanted to learn Greek.
Yes, Anne. And Anne is my favorite. Probably, Cromwell is so proud of his daughters, specifically his elder one, Anne, because she's so smart. He was like, "You're going to be the one running the Cromwell household."
She's claimed that she's really intelligent. She wants to learn math. She wants to learn Greek. She wants to become a property owner, probably. And he's like, "Oh, she's my heir." Because Cromwell is a feminist.
Even if he's a little confused that women have empathy sometimes. Because what happens, one of the ways this book handles sexism, it's really interesting because there's a lot of men talking in this book, but like when women do appear, you can tell that they are, and this is just the thing I like about the book, every character in this book has their own agencies and kind of politicking a little bit and kind of has their own plans. You can tell they're intelligent and they're all kind of maneuvering within the confines of that world, even if, it's a sexist world. They're not necessarily fighting against that, but they're fighting for whatever they can get out of that world. And so like at one point early on, Liz tells Cromwell, like, Henry better not put apart Catherine. He'll make enemies of half the realm, which are women, because we just wouldn't like that. And Cromwell later is like, is this maybe like a weird women thing where they all feel the same thing?
Well, they sit around and think about how each other feel and what they would feel if they were in that situation. And then he finishes with, that's not a bad thought, actually.
Yeah. The world would be better if men did that sometimes, is the vibe you get at the end of the scene. And
one of the things I like about that, because we've seen so many books and so many arguments of like, well, this character, how are you supposed to know this character is bad? You're in his viewpoint all the time. He thinks everything he does is good. And this is a great example of like, yes, this is a thought the character has, but clearly we are not supposed to agree with him that women have a weird thing called empathy that's like, special to their sex. Like, this is a moment where the author is like, okay, you and him don't agree on this. And this is one of the ways I'm going to show that this is a different world without saying that this is the right way to be.
Yep. And without also bashing you over the head with it, this author does not explain stuff for you. Similarly, like, she never introduces a character and goes, the Cardinal, Thomas Wolsey. Like, this author, it just throws shit at you and you have to catch as catch can, baby, and then put it together as you kind of weave through. And I think this happens a lot for people where a character gets mentioned who was mentioned like 500 years ago in pages, and you're like, who this be? And the author really is just like, chop chop, guys. We have no time.
Just
keep up.
Get with it.
I needed some swift-footed Achilles, some flaming-haired Agamemnons to remember who everybody is.
But
oh yeah, that's why they have little qualifiers in front of their name, because I cannot remember who the fuck this is and what they're doing.
Yeah, but she doesn't hold your hand with the things about like what you, the reader, are supposed to look at and go, oh wow, that was a bad way to think. Like at no point, there's never a character who was like, if only the world was different. And like one of the things we complain a lot in books that are set in sometimes either a historical sense or a setting where it is given a specific like societal overview, is that you'll suddenly have a character that feels like it was plucked off of our world and just dropped in, who's telling you about all the things in this world that are bad. And this doesn't do that. It's just giving it to you, and you as the reader go, oh, we're not going to talk about how weird that is, guys?
The meta-narrative knows that sexism is bad, but the people living in this world at this time, they don't think that way. They think that, women are a bit stupid. They're the worst sex.
And the female characters in the book, though, aren't going to be like, I'm going to just sit around. Like, they're still planning, they're still spying, they're still thinking things through.
Individual women can be pretty smart, and they can do things. It's cute that the women think they have agency.
Yep. But even within the confines of it, the women who are like, this is the world I'm in, I'ma grab every scrap I can for myself. If my virginity is my power, I'ma fucking use it, bro, for nothing less than the queendom. Like, I don't love Anne Boleyn as a character, but do I respect the hustle, my girl?
I respect her. I don't care what you say. One of the things this book does is it kind of like, I mean, first of all, there are so many hot bitchy women in it. I loved it. It was like a garden for me. But one of the things is that this book kind of disrupts some of the kind of established narratives of that time period, of the Henry VIII story. So like Catherine of Aragon is the good one and Anne Boleyn is a bitch who came in to steal it. And it's like, that's still kind of here. Like the book doesn't, do it. But like there's a certain amount of like, well, actually, who is right here? Who really like does the church have an ability not to let you marry again? Why necessarily would I personally like Catherine a lot, but like, does she have a right to stay married? This is also a thing with like the Spanish powers involved and how much influence they're having over other people. And it's like, yeah, like there's not clear morality sometimes in what people in politics are doing. And a lot of what they're doing is sort of politics at times. And so one of the places this shows up a little bit less. This book is about religion a lot, and yet it will not really talk about religion a ton. So at this time period, everybody was Catholic. The Catholics church had almost little states within states in that, like, they take money from their church holdings. Friars can't be like go to court. They control religious law, that kind of a thing. And like
they own land in England.
They own a lot of land. That's another thing to bear in mind is the church is extremely rich. And that's one of the motivating factors for both Cromwell and Henry is like, well, we could get some of that money. That would be nice. Why does that go to the church?
All to us.
And so
what if we just didn't pay the tithe and just lived like kings instead?
And at the time, there is like a Reformation. The Lutherans, I think it is at the time.
Luther was alive.
Martin Luther is nailing his statements onto the walls of churches, and other people are like, yes, Luther has seen the light. Why doth we need gold in our churches when they only obscure us from the Lord's sight?
Why don't we have...
bread is just bread.
Oh, and is purgatory... Did Jesus talk about purgatory? Those are like two things that continually come up.
Purgatory is not in the Bible.
Well, and that's the other thing is like people are increasingly literate, and now Tilney, one of the heretic people, is printing an English Bible. And so like that's seen as heresy because it's democratizing the power of the church and weakening it. And it's funny because the book isn't immediately like, yeah, awesome, Lutherans. It's like Cromwell is kind of like sliding in. You can tell that he is a reformer in the church, progressive, but like he's not super loud about it. And like at the time, also it's worth pointing out that these heretics were treated with really brutal violence. They are tortured to death. They're burned alive. They're burned alive. One of the better scenes in the book happens later where Cromwell is remembering as a child an
The
old
Lawler.
an old woman being burned alive at the stake, and like he goes and is looking from the distance, and the crowd is like, no, you got to come here, you got to see what happens when they're a heretic. And there's a very matronly woman who he calls his mother for the scene, who puts her hands on his shoulders and is like, look, this
because that's what they called child rearing at the time. They're like, let's you got to see this, so you become a proper man.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the small ways she uses cultural details to draw you into the world and the morality and all those wonderful things we talk about. But like, it's also like, if there's a bad guy in this book, it's Thomas More, which we'll talk about in a second. But like, the only really clear moral line here is like, yeah, you know, this persecution of heretics is not great. And so it's interesting that like the book kind of obscures and then rebuilds morals throughout it, and I was really impressed with the way she handled that. And there's also the fact that people believe in their religion. These are religious characters, and it's not like they're still very practical in their religion, but there isn't the sense that, you know, that there is in a lot of fantasy books where it's like, I'm an atheist, or at the very least a very secularized, because everyone in our day and age is a secularized religious person pretty much. Anyway, lots of qualifiers. But writing about a time period when people really thought that's how the world worked, but I don't really understand, like, as much as I adore A Song of Ice and Fire, a bunch of the characters in that book are essentially atheists in a time period.
They're strangely atheists.
Yeah, everybody would have been very religious and just thought that's how the world worked. And so in this case, everybody thinks that it's real, but like they're also very practical with it. And I really liked that juxtaposition, those two things working in concert.
And the book really instills this idea that purgatory is such an obvious thing that most people just take it for granted. You die, you go to purgatory. It's natural. Yep. That the thought that maybe purgatory doesn't exist is dangerous. And these people need to be silenced.
And threatening to your, like, very understanding. Because, like, and the book does such a good job of talking about this in relation to a couple of other small things, including the understanding that the earth is now, like, now being had, that the earth is round. And Thomas Cromwell talking about the difference between when he was young versus even during Wolsey's time, what we thought of the earth, and how that is, for some people, was so fundamentally earth-shattering, if you will.
Oh, what did you do there, Maria?
And how these things kind of mirror that, but are more significant. Like, the book is like, oh, people went from thinking the earth was, you know, center of the universe and flat, and now they're like, oh, look, it's round, and now everybody believes it. But God forbid these religious reformations are true or happening. The other thing that I think the author does really well, and it kind of starts here because there are two characters presented in the first part, The Downfall of Wolsey, that are, you're just like, fuck them. I hate them. And it's Norfolk and Suffolk.
I like Norfolk dukes. Right from the beginning. That's funny. I mean, he's a bad person, but he's a bad person. But St. Jude.
Yes. And as the book goes on, these characters, you get to know them. Cromwell, I wouldn't say never fully becomes friends with them, but, like, they have dinner, they talk, and I think it's, which one of them really loves his daughter or wife, and I think it was Suffolk, is just really sad. Like, there are moments where this author takes characters where she's like, this guy isn't necessarily a good person, but you're going to feel bad for him. He's going to feel human. He's going to feel like he has bad takes that are shitty. And I would argue she even does that with Thomas More. Because as much as for most of the book, you're fuck Thomas More. There are scenes where you're like, come on, Thomas, just say it. You don't have to do this, buddy. Like, you don't need to die.
That ending
don't
scene,
do it.
The last scene with him is such a culmination of the book as a whole. And you're like...
Yep.
No, I totally agree. She's very good at creating that kind of nuanced character.
And I find it is just much more realistic, and I'm able to hate characters but still think of them as human and not want them to get tortured while still wanting them to get punished. Like, it's this really weird position where she puts you in, where you mirror Cromwell, where you're like, no, this guy was wrong and he shouldn't have been doing any of this, but at the same time he's like, go home to your daughter and your wife Alice will cook you a meal. Like, come on, buddy. And that's one of my favorite things about Cromwell is even if he needs you to get taken down a couple of pegs, he's going to try give you within the down a couple of pegs the best version of the situation you could possibly have versus what other people are thinking about for you in the background. And it makes it where, for me, I not only cheered for Cromwell, but I was always like, I think Cromwell's right.
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Team Cromwell.
Yeah. Hashtag.
I'm with Cromwell.
Guys, if you got this far in the video, leave a comment saying hashtag with Cromwell.
Hashtag with Cromwell.
I stand with Cromwell.
And it's funny because for the most part, I'm with Catherine. Like in a lot of
Oh
ways.
yeah. Oh, Catherine is such an amazing. She is written so fantastically. The author describes how she wears these gowns just laden with jewels, like she's a fortress of diamonds and gold, pummeling through the walls, the halls of the Tudor castle, as if she could sort of breach her way back into Henry's heart.
And it's also the idea that they did like each other, like they were for the most part outside of him wanting to sleep with other people, and now
Henry still needs her. Like emotionally, he still needs her up until like 2/3 of the way through the book. Like he'll still go talk to her, and at one point she's like, "Okay, well, when am I following him? Because he always has me following. He always talks to me first."
Yeah. He always brings me around with him. He always has me wherever we go. Like, I'm just... And so there's this thing where you're like, okay, I understand a divorce, but you also feel bad for Catherine because for this plan of theirs, which works, Cromwell does it because he makes everything work, my boy, it now means you weren't married for the past 20 years, Catherine. You were having an affair with your husband's brother, and your daughter is a bastard now.
It's a bastard.
She's no longer the Prince of Wales. She's just Lady Anne, or Lady Mary, excuse me. And there's a lot of Marys, Annes, and Jane. There's a lot of Mary Anns and Janes in this book. It's just so, like, as much as I felt for Catherine throughout the whole book, and I was like, you were married, bro. You kind of just need to own this. Like, maybe pick a bastard as your heir. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, he had a male bastard. Just make him the heir.
Yeah, like, what are we doing? It would be so much easier to do that than everything. But at the same time, especially Cromwell going, why are we giving all this money? Because, like, from a historical perspective, God, you know what I kept thinking about the entire time I read this book? I was thinking about fucking, what was his name? In Shogun. The entire time being like, the fucking papists!
The Navigator.
Blackwell? What was that his name? What was his name?
Blackcoat? They say it's it's not Ganjin, is it? It's...
Gaijin.
Gaijin is an outsider, but they call him something else.
Yeah. Anjin, you mean?
Anjin. Yeah.
Anjin.
But anyway, I was thinking about how much he detested and thought of, like, papists and Catholics so badly. And then I'm like, this entire book, it's like, we're Catholics. Maybe we're thinking about being something else. And it's just like how funny history is that, like, England gets to the point where it makes this choice to separate themselves from the Catholic state. And then immediately is like, were we ever Catholics?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
Fuck those papists.
That's one of the things Thomas Cromwell brings up, is that if you want change, the best way is to convince people that it was always that way. So actually, the king always had this currency. He just didn't realize that he owned these lands or whatever.
And the Pope took it from him.
Yes. No, it's so funny. And that's kind of the religious side of this book that I really enjoy, how, like, nuanced it was in terms of the actual history, because this will start off like 200 years of brutal war. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this religious change is not going to go well for England if you know your history, which I know a little.
No.
But it's amazing kind of watching it from this bird's eye view unfold, and like the slow acceptance of it, and then thinking about how this turns into like American puritanicalism and like witches burning, and it's just from a historical experience. Reading this was just wild, and being like, if we just did this a little differently, you know.
It's also interesting that like it kind of cleared up some misconceptions in terms of like I had the Cliff Notes version of Henry VIII where it was like, oh, okay, so he marries Anne Boleyn, he gets excommunicated, and now they're Protestants. And it's like, no, there was a bunch of legalese where they're sort of slowly twisting from here to there.
They basically became Protestants so he could marry Anne Boleyn.
Right, but it's like it's kind of a slow, granular process.
They're still like mainly Catholic. And it's like slowly separating and then just being like, no, Pope, you go over there before they get to the point where they're like, no saints, Catholics, no communion, no this, no that. And like, that's going to be the thing that like shunts off all those pilgrims to America because they don't want to do any of that stuff anymore. But England is still doing them. And it's just this slow descent and like how much religion just defined your life is fucking wild as someone who is not religious, and it's almost like watching aliens deal with while reading this book. Like it just because I found myself being like, yeah, why are they doing this? Catherine was legally, the Pope said it, you got dispensation, Catherine's right, and I'm like, I don't believe in any of this. Like, what are
no. But Catherine is the lawful wife.
Yeah, she's the lawful wife. What are we doing? And it's like, and then when the Pope is like, actually, that dispensation was correct. She is your wife. I was like, see, I knew it the whole time. And but at the same time, you're like, just because like it all just doesn't. And so for
this
me,
is all arbitrary to begin with. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we picking sides so heavily?
And so it's just a weird, as someone who is like agnostic, coming into this book and just getting like fisticuffing on behalf of these characters in these religious battles.
It's really
and it's such an emotional turmoil to be like, yeah, Catherine is the rightful queen, but at the same time you're like, Team Cromwell, and he's like, oh, but he's with Anne now. Oh my God, what do I believe? I don't know.
Exactly.
Okay. So the one character who does relate to religion before we go into talking about other characters is Thomas More, who I first came to know through A Man for All Seasons, the movie version, which is a very kind of famous, like, oh, he's a man who stands for his principles. And, you know, he's a strong Catholic, even as the world kind of tried to change him, and he died for his principles and stuff. And that's often how he is portrayed. And then this book is like, actually, what if he was a grumpy old goat who tortured people to death and was actually really unlikable? And I'm like, I am here for it. I love this portrayal of him.
The thing is that what if being a man of his principles, what if being a good Christian man of his principles in this time actually kind of required him to also be a really terrible person who did horrible things to other humans because he thought he was right to do it. He thought he was defending God in being... I remember the first time I read this book. The first time Thomas More was introduced, I was listening I was doing something else when I was listening to it, and I thought, oh, who is that guy? Is he the king's torturer or something? Because he's always mentioned when there's torture going on. And later on you're like, oh no, he's the chancellor? Oh, he's that Thomas More! Oh my God! It's like, oh, how did these two images I had fit together? Because I too was inundated with the idea of Thomas More as this godly man, this principled man who refused to go back on his conviction and was unjustly executed because of it.
And I think the magic of it is that, like, he was also kind of right. If his goal was to defend Catholic England and its position then, like...
Yeah.
He was fighting the battle he wanted to be fighting the whole time. And these things were going to fundamentally change England in a way he didn't want. And not to, like, don't do what Thomas More did. Absolutely not. But, like, it's wild how this book just plays with your conceptions. I think a perfect example for this is... I don't know about you guys, but my conception of Henry VIII was not how he is portrayed in this book.
No, he's so plaintive. It's so funny.
Yeah, you're like, he's that mad tyrant who killed all his wife, right? He's the Bluebeard of the story. And then he's like, who is this man-child?
Yeah, and he's like, Cromwell, do you think this is okay? And Cromwell's like,
Daddy Cromwell, hold my hand.
And he's this big, large, imposing guy, even as that's happening.
He's like, I had a dream that my brother came to me and he was judging me because of what I did. And Cromwell has to be like, but like, did he say that? Maybe you just read the situation wrong. And he's like, you know what? You're right. Let me go back to sleep, Papa.
Yes, and Henry, remember the 3 sons. Remember your father's legacy. Your brother came to say that he could not fulfill the prophecy and that you must do it in his stead. And Henry's like, oh yes, I feel so much better now. I can go back to sleep.
Good night now, Papa.
This is very accurate as someone who read the book, guys. It's pretty closely paraphrased, actually.
It's so
yeah,
funny.
Cromwell goes home, and his children are like, they got you out of bed for that.
There's two moments that I think really well characterize Henry in this book, and one of them is on purpose and one I don't think is on purpose. One is when he and Cromwell are doing archery because he really likes doing archery, and Cromwell is saying that like, oh, he has basically like a juniors league he does with like some other neighborhood people, and Henry's like, oh, I should go out and do it with you in disguise. It's good for a king to be seen. And
wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't it be great?
Like, no.
And also then he holds out his archer's brace or whatever, and somebody just immediately comes to undo it. And it's like, that is the privilege he has lived in. He has always been taken care of to the point where he doesn't understand it. And you're like, yeah, he has essentially been created as a man-child by the court. Like, that is kind of, being a king is to be socialized as a man-child who's dependent on them. And the only real
Henry
emotional...
is infantilized. He is used to not doing anything for himself and not taking any of the consequences of his actions, so he can't judge consequence at all. We see it time and time again in this book. He's like, he's angry with Wolsey, so he casts Wolsey out, and he's like, oh no, but he's dead now, and that's not what I wanted. Where's my grandfather?
Mm-hmm. And the other moment that I think, oh, sorry, you go ahead and I'll talk about it.
Just because it has to do with this moment, but it ties into this. He's doing archery, and as Thomas looks at him doing it, he's like, oh, the way he pulls back the bow, it's so kingly. There's like, he has a kingly air, but he's also not that good of a shot. He talks about his grandfather, who was in war a longbowman and was like his entire body went into how he pulled back that string. Mm-hmm. And it's this versus Henry, who's like, tra-la-la, for pleasure. Like, he's shooting for pleasure.
Actually, fun fact, they have dug up historical skeletons of the time, and they have actually seen that the bones in longbowmen they have bigger, more bone density in their shoulders, in their arms. Basically, pulling the bow their whole lives changed them on a physical stage. And Cromwell really ruminates on that. Henry is graceful and he looks kingly, but he doesn't... He isn't a bowman.
And it brings into question that everything the king does, he does for pleasure, not for the reasons the other people outside are actually doing the thing. The longbowmen are doing it for survival, for war, because it's their job. Hunters who go out and hunt for not pleasure are doing it for these specific things. And everything Henry does is in this little bubble of court and pleasure. And so he's good, but he's not actually going in amongst people who do it more regularly. He'd be shamed.
Okay, but here's the thing.
He'd be useless.
Counterpoint. Is it more important that he hits something or that he performs kingship to those around him so that they feel that he is a legitimate power and that the social structure will remain the same? Not to be a Henry apologist, but like, it is really goofy how...
is that the king's power is derivative of God. He is God's chosen representative. So for the king, it is probably more important to look kingly than to actually be a good king. And the people who are being a good king are the people around him, like the chancellors and the advisors
the administrators
and the adjudicators. Yeah.
And it's one of these things where if you've ever seen a real longbowman, or not a real one, but historical ones, they look so fucking goofy when they pull the bow because they have to jut their butt out and shoot like this. And I'm like, good for Henry. Don't look like that. Look cool while you're doing it.
Yeah. And it also speaks to this idea that we don't have, because we don't have a king.
Right.
That there is this
I have a king
belief.
Oh,
yes,
God.
you have a king. But like, not in the sense where, like, nobody nowadays like, oh my God, this heavenly being, the king. There's a point where somebody, I think it was his son Gregory. No, I think it was Richard. Richard met him. Richard is Thomas's nephew from his sister Kat and her husband, and he basically is, if you look back, like a bastard of one of the Tudors, so is maybe a cousin to Henry.
Cousin of Henry's.
Yeah, bastard cousin of Henry. And he, like, Henry touches him and is like, my cousin, Richard! I see the Tudor look at you. And afterwards, Richard's like, oh my God, you get to see him every day. And there was this sense of mysticism about your ruler, about your king, that we cannot relate to, because for us, politicians are just kind of scummy in a lot of ways.
This is a passage out of War and Peace as well, which I fully intend to get you to read at some point. Anyway,
she's speaking to Maria
at that point as well, and this is a faithful adaptation because Tolstoy wrote it not that many years after these events actually happened, and he also instills in you how the people look upon their Tsar as he comes through the streets, and it's almost like they are meeting Jesus. They have the same visceral reaction as if they were meeting one of the saints.
And it's something so
alien
foreign
to us.
Mm-hmm. Alien. And as you're reading it, you're thinking, because like I read it and I'm like, who on God's green earth was taking Henry seriously? For realties. Pardon, people. Henry. And there's this one point where somebody was like, if you were King Cromwell, and he was like, if I was king, this wouldn't have happened. And I was like, and part of me was like, you're a blacksmith's son, Cromwell, it couldn't have happened. But at the same time, I'm like, fuck that voice, Maria. He would have been way better. You know, like,
yeah, wouldn't he been a great king?
He would have been a great king.
reforms.
But they had such, and despite the fact that, you know, there was all that war about who actually was supposed to be king between the Plantagenets and the Tudors. Like, once these people believed, like, this is our king, there's a vision, a aura, a sense that they, like, believed so hardcore that it's just wild, because you as the reader are like, I don't see it.
There was a dawn of the three suns, and then at that day, the Tudors were victorious on the battlefield, and everyone took it as a sign from God.
And that's the thing is, because none of this is actually weighted off of anything real, the performance of it is what's important. I often talk about this the military history blog I read, but like one of the points he makes is that war is actually a fantastic way to legitimize yourself, because you have everybody coming together, they're doing a performance, everybody is like, okay, we're doing this. Also, war is one of the only ways to get rich fast in the ancient world, which people don't understand because it's old. I mean, we just still see this with politicians a little bit, in that there's still a performance of politicians. One of the differences I'd heard once is that one of the reasons Navalny is liked more by Western people than by Russian people is because he has a more Western political performance. So like he shows his family and he's a man of the family, which is a thing in America we like, but in Russia that's seen as kind of like, that's a little weak and gay. So there is still that, but I think unfortunately here in the year of our Lord,
Navalny was into the soft stuff.
Ugh, families.
it's
your children.
Women. But here in the year of 2025 of our Lord, I think we've proven that someone can be president with no presidential performance whatsoever, and there's still actual powers involved. Where at that time, no, it really was like a a house of cards where if you just start knocking these cards down, the whole thing will collapse. Like, what power do these people actually hold? And so that's an aspect that I thought was very interesting of the book. And again, not to be a Henry apologist, because especially in the next book, he's going to start killing people real fast.
It's not being an apologist, really. It's just seeing how the strings were woven together to make this king who did these things, and that is the interest for you as the reader.
Yeah, and how Cromwell navigates it.
Will?
No, I was going to move us on to another subject, but I realized
I also was going to as well.
Okay, so in terms of characters, really quick, we want to talk about the Boleyn, Anne Boleyn, Mary Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and those were my three that I really wanted to get to.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of characters I'd love to touch on. Like, I love Norfolk and his, like, I'm a bite people, or tear them with my teeth stuff. But I think you're right. I think those are the main players that affect things. And just, like, historically, this book takes you through Anne becoming queen, her first two pregnancies where she doesn't have a baby, or she has a girl, and then the second one is a miscarriage. Spoilers, if you didn't know, history. And then how, once they're married, what their relationship is like, and then the beginning of, and then the political side of making it legal to no longer be part of the Catholic Church in the way they were previously.
Oh, I also wanted to talk Princess Mary a little bit, too. So that's for Lindbergh. Am I missing anyone? Because you know this book better than I do.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
We've covered the major players.
Yeah, I wish we could talk about all the people that get married out of Austin Friars.
We can do it real quick, as long as it only takes like a minute or two.
About the incest, but
one thing actually that is important. So two people from Austin Friars that are important are Raph, who is like Cromwell's like
ward
/ son / assistant, who, like, again, it's a very good it shows the ways he's kind of trying to advance the people in his power. At one point Raph gets married to the wrong person, and Cromwell's like, you should have said something, but here's how we'll sell it to your dad. And Raph's like, I don't know why I didn't tell you, I should have just told you, because there's a lot here in the book about like fathers.
And Cromwell's first instinct is to be like, God damn it, we could have married just so good, before he like kind of is like, fuck it.
And then
go be happy.
The other thing is, because Liz died, at some point, Cromwell enters into an affair with her sister Jo, and this is at the time
Joanne. Jo's his niece.
I can't remember the names. I thought Helen also was Jo at one point. I was like, did I misremember the names? And
Helen's the
Joanne, and it's mentioned that it's for both of them, it's kind of like a grief thing that they're bonding through, and he calls her Liz a couple times. And at this time, she is A, married, but B, it's considered incest because she was here. They're related through the church. And there's a really beautiful scene where they end up having to call it off, where like they really talk as equals, and he has this thing about a mirror that I didn't fully understand, but Lindbergh will now explain.
Cromwell has a mirror analogy. He says, I wish you will always have a fine, magnificent mirror, Joanna. As a man, it is my purview to always be able to look at myself in the mirror. And as such, I wish you a fine mirror, because you, Jo, are a fine woman to look at. You're a woman who deserves to be looked at.
And it just really is a beautiful... And again, as much as I like the political scenes, my favorite are these small moments between characters that are quiet, that are completely fictionalized. It's not like they were like, old Thomas was like, today I spoke with Joanne and we discussed that we were never going to sleep with each other ever again, and she handled it really well. And in fact, it was her idea. We came at it at the same, so this is an entirely fictionalized scene, but there is this quiet grace about it in how it works, and her, like, him being like, we have to have this conversation, and then her being like, listen, this can't happen again. This is why it happened. Like, adore you, my kids adore you, and also because the mirror thing comes because she like sees herself and then like looks away and doesn't want to engage with her reflection, whether for shame, and I think part of it is the shame that women carry for sexual misdeeds versus that men carry outside of wedlock. A man can sleep with a woman outside of wedlock and he's fine, but that lady, fuck her. And so the idea of yes. And all of these things that go into her being less willing to look at her reflection and him to be like, no, you are, as a human, worth looking at and engaging in yourself and being looked at. And it's just...
And it's such a, not intense, but it's like a melancholic scene. And of course, it also, contrasts with what's happening with Henry, who is taking his affair and making it the problem of all of Christendom, whereas Thomas is much more like, okay, it's gotta end. This isn't gonna go anywhere. Yep. We should shut this down.
And literally is perfectly mirrored, where after Henry marries Anne, Anne gets preggers, and Henry's like, I don't want to be celibate again, so I'm gonna...
Oh, God.
I'm gonna ride your sister while you're carrying my child.
The French way.
It is
you always have to have a fine mare in the stables for the king to ride.
Yeah. And the Boleyns are like, we need to keep it within the family. And so for the king to do this thing with his wife's sister while she's pregnant... Hey, okay, buddies.
Totally fine. She's a nice hole to occupy him until fit again.
What they're referring to, if you don't know, is that before Anne Boleyn became the king's paramour, Mary Boleyn, her sister, had been at court and had been his paramour. And Mary Boleyn is like such a great character because she starts off the book trying to seduce Cromwell in like the most, like it's very subtle and sensual.
I'd fancy me a capable husband, one with strong, fine hands.
Oh, what kind of fur are you wearing?
Did you see my stockings as I ran towards you?
Yeah, that was funny.
They were green.
My father would throw a fit.
And then, like 10 pages later, he realizes, like, oh, she was pregnant. That's why she was coming on to me so hard. Is she needed to run for cover, and it's funny because I was like, oh, that crafty bitch. They belong together. That would be so good. And she'll be a presence throughout the book. Me and Lindbergh really ship her and Cromwell, and I not until the end.
At one point, I really did, but after a while, her situation just becomes so sad because Henry, he takes her into his bed and he uses her, and as soon as he gets eyes for Anne, he tosses her out head first. So she's shipped off to be married to some old dude who she has an extremely loveless relationship with. And then the old dude dies, and basically she just persists as court as the whore. Everyone calls her the whore. And then, Anne gets preggers, so, Henry has to have someone nice to dip in, so Mary, in you go again. And at some point, she talks with Cromwell, and there's this really strong undercurrent of that, this is my life, this is my family. There's no getting away from them.
I think Lindbergh the other day mentioned it as like the men in the family are scheming and offering their daughters as like pawns to get what they want. And it kind of reminded me almost of a bit of a socialist critique in that like the workers are the labor, the wealth of the workers are generated is taken from them. These women are going to be used by their fathers to advance the plight of their family, but the women themselves will not. Well, Anne will, but in terms of Mary is not going to do better in life because she was the queen's whore.
No, Mary just gets used. She gets used and she gets scorned, and Anne looks at her sister and she's like, that's not gonna be me. Fuck it. That is not my life. I'm gonna be the schemer.
I will use my sister as, as part, or abuse my sister within my scheming. And it really is just so sad. And she tries it again with Cromwell. See, I love my boy Cromwell so much that I'm like, no, you don't get to scheme him. He schemes you, which he doesn't. He never.
I want her to want Cromwell.
Yes,
I'm like, this man is awesome.
And that's why at first when she was like, you're a capable man. I was like, damn, look at this. Game recognizes game. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, no, that's not what it was. She was just like, help, you look like a sap that would be like, oh, look.
I think she's still...
You look single.
No, I think she grows to respect him because they still scheme as time goes on.
She does. And I think as friends, I love it. But then there's that scene later in the book, again, where she's like, what are you doing tonight, Tommy boy? And
I hear you still haven't wed.
And he's almost like, Liz, take your hand off. Oh, well, this isn't the scene where he says that, but he's like, previously he was like, maybe I'm over Liz, and then this happens, and it's like, is he gonna sleep with Mary? And then the guy she was supposed to meet with and sleep with that night comes up, and she was like, where were you? I waited. And he's like, and it's hysterical because she's like hanging on Cromwell, like, what are you doing? And then Cromwell's like, I'm gonna go to bed and say my prayers. And she's like, no, you don't have to leave. And then he's like, that's the guy you were. And so she literally just hits on Cromwell like that when she needs something. And in this,
I love it when female characters abuse male characters. I find it, and they're hot and bitchy about it. No, what killed it for me is after that, it's so sad, like how she is and how kind of like slightly unhinged she gets. And that's the point where I was like, okay, this is not fun anymore.
It's just really her coping mechanism. It's the only currency she knows. It's the only thing she's ever been valued for. And as such, I think she can't really see value in others.
It's just so there's a point after Anne miscarries her second pregnancy. So the first one she has a baby, Elizabeth, and then the second one she miscarries. And after that, she finds out her sister is pregnant, Mary's pregnant, and it is probably the king's. And there is much anger, and Mary ends up running off and marrying the guy who the one she was meeting when Cromwell, she was like, hello, how are you doing, Tommy? She ends up marrying that guy even though he doesn't have a station, but he like genuinely likes her and she tries to attach herself. But at the same time, even in a marriage where somebody, like she's married someone, he likes her, she likes him, she's like, but I've been raised wealthy and now I'm in a poor situation and it kind of sucks. This isn't the life. And she just like, when I tell you, Mary draws all the shit hands and it is so sad.
She was destined for better, and then she happened to have an opportunistic father and uncle who were like, how can we hawk our women on Henry to advance in the social ranking?
You kind of think she's going to go, well, I'm curious to see what happens with her, because I actually don't know what happens with her besides the fact that she doesn't get axed when Anne and a bunch of the others do. So I'm curious to see in the second book where that goes, even just in terms of character. Like, is she going to rally? Is she going to get worse? Are her and Cromwell going to make out? And so... and the other thing is, Anne is the other Boleyn sister, more widely known, which is funny because like everybody in the book is like, she's really flat, guys, and everybody jokes about it. It's like a running joke.
Everyone's like, does she even have anything in there?
It's really funny. And she and Cromwell meet, and she thinks he's on Wolsey's side, so she's kind of cold to him. But immediately they start to form a bit of like a very kind of practical relationship of like, oh, okay, I kind of need you, you kind of need me, we kind of need to play nice.
They have an antagonistic sort of respect for each other, where like, oh, we can use each other and we can both see the benefit in it, and I respect your cunning.
They're both very, very quietly religious reformers or reformists. Like, they both read the books and the thing.
They're like, what is this Catholic nonsense, Jesus?
And it's funny because they kind of bond a little bit with that, because like Henry isn't there yet. Henry's not like, yes, let me read the Bible in English. He's not. How dare we? And so they develop, like, they have this like confrontational friendship that has these like layers of ways they respect each other and understand each other, and it's just, and Anne is such a fascinating character because she's a bitch and you don't understand. Like, there's this one point where he sees her and he's like, looking at her now, I can kind of see what the king, and it's when she's on her coronation day and she's all done up and she's like, I'm gonna do this. And he's like, I get it. For the past 5 years, I haven't gotten it at all.
Yeah, in the past, he's noted that, she's got slightly protruding eyes and she's very pale and a sort of beautiful, I guess, if you're into that. But when she's crowned, he's like, I see it now. I see her beauty now.
And she's kind of, when she's pregnant too, I found the scenes of them together really nice because Cromwell is an ally. He understands women and like what they go through and stuff. And he's very sympathetic to her married plight and her being, you get a sense that he understands being pregnant is difficult in a way that other men don't, where he's like, she's not going to be able to stand that long.
Yeah, Cromwell just understands that women are just as much human and just as much capable of being intelligent and driven as men. And it is life that has positioned them in these trials where they must bear challenges. They must bear responsibilities that men don't.
And it just is such an interesting read because Anne is just really an antagonistic. Like, she'll poke you, even if you didn't need to be poked. She a bitch.
There's this whole spiel about how she pinches Mary just to be mean to her.
I love that her and Mary don't get along at all.
It's so funny. Also, can I just say, there's this point where Mary's like, listen, I'll let you know if that inch of skin is, when that's finally. And after the first time Henry and Anne sleep together, the next time Mary sees Cromwell, she's like...
Because she said she would have to start loosening her clothes if she got pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was really good.
It's, and it just, like, the dynamic between them, and also Anne dealing with, like, once she becomes queen and the fluctuations in her relationship with Henry once the mysticism, like, there's a line that says, Anne was a very easy woman to love and court illicitly, but once out in but as a wife is harder because she, you know, where Catherine was very sweet and supportive and loving, Anne is Anne, and she's still a cold, icy bitch, which is great for an illicit love affair, but from a wife, especially for Henry, who wants a bit of a mother wife, not ideal.
Yeah.
No, and Henry never understood that Catherine of Aragon is the daughter of a ruling queen. She has been brought up to understand how to govern. So she plays the political play, whereas Anne has been raised to be a princess. She's the center of attention. She wants it her way. And she continues to be herself after the marriage, and it immediately causes issues. And for me, I was like, why do I suddenly feel sorry for Anne? She's a bitch. Yep. But I don't want to see her sad.
Yeah, and also the like pressure. You've done the thing. You've gotten him to make you his queen, and now you have one job. To make a son. And the pressure for 9 months, you are lugging around a thing inside. I don't love pregnancy as a concept, so please bear this in mind as I discuss it. You've got, like, at a certain point, you can't walk, you're waddling everywhere, it's heavy. You've got a set of teeth inside your stomach. There is a second set of teeth and hair, depending on if the baby has hair, just inside you. There is a head of hair inside you.
And this is I'm bad with centuries because I'm European. This is the 1500s. There were no maternity clothes. She had to wear a fucking corset.
Yes.
Poor woman.
And do this whole thing, and it's uncomfortable, and it's, you know, like, and hormones and all this. And
an English summer is hot and humid and miserable.
And you're just sitting there like, God, this needs to be a son. Everything she fought for and put for herself in this position comes down to producing a legitimate male.
The spout. Pressure. It must be the spout.
And the amount of pressure that is, like, the minute she's pregnant and she's like, don't even say it's not a boy, because it's so much. And you're like, couldn't be me. I wouldn't. I would never want to be in that position. That is a terrifying position to be in. And so you feel for her when there's this, and the way she writes the scene, Mantel writes the scene of when because you don't see the birth. It is just Henry being told, like someone tells Henry something and he goes, healthy, you say? Oh, good. That's great. And then it goes to, they now have to add some S's to the ends of Prince. And so the way it, like that moment and just knowing how
I've always found
she must
the
feel.
claustrophobia.
And immediately, every single person just completely loses interest. They're like,
I've always found the claustrophobia of Anne's story so compelling. Of like, she did these bad things to get there, and then she's trapped.
She is trapped without a power structure, and she is given him.
Didn't really do that many bad things.
I mean, again, she's generally portrayed as having done. My dog can't decide if he can jump on a bed or not, which he's jumped on.
This is also a point of feminism, because is Anne the bitch because Henry desires her? Is she the bitch because she plays on that desire to get what she wants? Is she a bitch because she wants a better institution in life?
I mean, I would say that this book especially kind of made me go like, oh, is Catherine of Aragon wrong here? I'd always kind of been on her side, but like this whole thing is very like, it is hard to overlay a modern sense of morality onto people from that era and their religious beliefs, because it's like, is it going to destabilize the realm? Well, do we want the Catholic Church around? Really, who does? Like, it's very difficult to map
the morality onto that
but also
moment.
The point of the things Anne did. What did Anne really do? Anne presented herself. She was attractive. A king wanted her, and she played on that. Why is she remembered historically as the whore of Babylon? When it was Henry who did these things. Henry caused the schism. Henry executed his daddy. Henry caused the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people because he wanted a new wife.
Any power she had was given by Henry. And that's what I think makes the scenes where she's pregnant and the sympathy you feel for her so profound. Because again, she is now in a terrible situation where she cannot control if she gets pregnant, when she gets pregnant, and what the sex of the child will be. And it is, I think, claustrophobic.
And her whole life hinges on it. It is the only value she has. She does not have a value as a human being. She is a walking, living womb that Henry needs to plant his seed in, and it needs to come out in the right shape.
And it is this moment when you really begin to feel, as Will said in the beginning, and as we talked about, that his remarriage was very much so about getting a son, and not, like, partially, obviously, pushed by the lust to get in Annie's pants.
He desired her because she did not give in to him.
Yes.
But also the major driving force in him wanting a new wife is because Catherine was getting old and he needs a son.
He needs a son. And so the state of their relationship after marriage, when the expectation is, okay, now give me the son I asked for, is fucking terrifying. And especially knowing her fate and what's going to happen. Because as a woman, you cannot control that. You cannot control if you produce a son.
My sister has had 3 sons in a row.
3 sons in a row.
We actually see that it's a genetic modifier, that some mare lines will give more mares and some mare lines will give stallions, and it's genetics. You can't do anything.
Yeah, it's just also random chance. Sometimes, you flip a dice and it does land on the number 1 in 100. You know what I mean? Like, it is chance, and there's something so scary about that. And going back to it, and also it's the delicious irony of like, oh, probably the problem with these sons is Henry. Like, Henry had like 6 chances. Like, if this is a scientific study, he's the one who he's the outlier here in terms of having sons.
And how much
too much inbreeding.
Yeah, but the affection that he has, because something that's, I'm sure the later books are gonna deal with it, and you can speak to this, Lindbergh, because I'm sure you've read them. But in, like, historically, the wife that he remembers the most fondly and thought about later in life is number 3, the one who gave him his son, who he was also married to for the shortest amount of time because she died.
I don't want to talk about it. I like her so much in this book.
And she's the one he pines for later in life. And
the Virgin Mary,
and immediately, first pregnancy, boom, son. And the fact that, like, is that and also the one he knew the least. I just want to
he misses her as a symbol. He doesn't miss her as a human being.
Because he knows Anne, he knows Catherine. And like we mentioned, he still loves Catherine in a lot of ways.
And but he still treats her like shit.
It's such a classic, like, Madonna horror, like his wives all split onto that, because, like, I do think also he respected Catherine the most. This book has a part where, like, she runs a war for him and wants to send him the head of a Scottish king. And everyone's like, that's not really British enough, guys. Like, that's a little bit too much.
I love Catherine. We don't get a ton of her in the book, but every scene with her, she's just, and also the fondness she genuinely had to her husband. Like, there's this point where she's like, yo, is he reading my letters? I'll write him a letter. Because she's still just communicating with him. And, like,
you know, I think there's something to Henry in that, like, there are people who actually like him for him. Wolsey really liked him for him. Catherine seems to really like him. Even Cromwell seems to genuinely kind of like Henry. So there is a charisma to the man-child. And I kind of liked that nuance on it. One thing going back is, so back at the beginning, I had mentioned that the idea of her not giving, of Anne not giving Saxon to Henry was a thing that came up later. And I feel like that, I mean, I do like the way the book presents it because there are a lot of feminist themes you can tell through it. But, like, in and of itself is kind of like it wasn't really Henry's fault. She had ensorcelled him with her feminine wiles a little bit. And, like, that is almost an excuse for how he acted versus, like, it's just a way of giving him taking a little of the responsibility off of him in a little bit of a sexist way. Maria made that face, if I keep it in, because she just learned that all babies have hair in the womb and it just falls off.
Chris M., why would you say that?
What?
In the chat, I just so happened to open the chat, and Chris M goes, "I'ma scare Maria by saying all babies go through a phase in the belly where they have hair all over the body."
Oh yeah, well, okay.
Do they
a horror?
Do women cough it up like a hairball, like a cat? Like,
pregnancy is horrifying.
No, but the fetus changes a lot during its development.
What I find so funny is the things you said disgusted you about having a baby is, like, those are the arguments pro-abortion or anti-abortion people use, is like, it has fingernails. And Maria's like, it's got fingernails?
Inside me? Inside me? Get it the fuck out. Who asked? You know, when people are like, oh, the glow, I'm like, that's from the symbiotic happiness of the parasite inside. You're like,
that's the happy narcotics treating you.
I really dislike pregnancy. My mom is horrified. She was like, we were talking about it, and she was like, pregnancy was like feeling the touch of the hand of God. And I'm like, you're barely religious. Like, but she was like, it's cosmic. And I'm like, I'm going to be happy.
Drugs.
Yeah, I'm going to be happy living my whole life never having experienced that.
Not getting touched by God in the vagina.
Yeah. He can stay over there, wherever he is.
Yeah, it's okay. He can keep his past to himself, right?
Yes, but so pregnancy is terrifying, and the pressure on a queen to create an heir is crippling.
When she has no fucking ability to affect it. That's what's so weirdly, like, victim blamey about it and sexist.
Well, when all she does is be a receptacle.
And I think it's that. Who is it? There's literally that one. I think it's Rochford.
Lady Rochford.
The bitches. So amongst this book, there's one bitch to rule them all, and it is Jane Rochford. She is brutal. Like the rumors she spits out, I was like,
she is so great.
She is brutal, but she literally says, "Why is it that it's always there's something wrong with her womb, but we're never questioning the man's seed? Like, that seems unfair. It takes two to tango, motherfucker. There I was like, yay, girl boss. And then she starts saying other stuff about other women, and I was like, no, girl boss, no.
Gaslight gatekeep. That's what
Gaslight gatekeep. No, we don't like this. But she is a bitch, and I love her. Like, as a character, love her. But as a person, I don't even want to see her. She'll make me cry.
She's so funny. Yeah, I loved her too. The other character, so we get a little bit of Mary the princess, and it's very interesting because you get a very sense for like, this is why she ended up such a rigid and brittle person, is because she was put in this
Everyone ridicules Mary. Mary the talking shrimp. Mary the dwarf.
And she likes Cromwell because he gave her a seat one time when her mom was like, no, you need to keep
and Cromwell just notes how she kind of cowers like a whipped dog.
Oh, and you just feel so bad for her to go from a princess of the realm and like the princess. Like if people die, you're it. And to just get turned into a servant, like she gets put in her younger sister's household as one of her ladies in waiting kind of thing, and she refuses to engage with it, and so she is like sick, wasting away. But she there's a lady there who is willing to treat her kindly and wants to be nice to her, but Mary will not stand for the fact that this lady will not refer to her with her proper title. And she just, like, there's a conversation where Cromwell is talking to her and is like, says something about her mother, and she's like, the queen. Like, and every time Cromwell says something, she's interjecting with what she thinks is the correct thing that is currently legally no longer the truth. Papally, if you're thinking of Catholicism, yes, still the truth. And so it's just these two warring sides, and poor Mary is just wasting away. But Will, I think you're right. The brittleness that she's known for, like, obviously, that's what would happen.
That's all she had to hang on to. She was taken from her mother. This is the only place she has in life, and like I really feel for her. I really liked her.
I mean, I do get people who like this book doesn't vibe with them, like Chris, and like I get it. If this isn't, and also I don't think this is a book I could have read. I think this is only a book I could have listened to. Because if I read it, I'd be like, this is good, but like I have other shit to do. You know what I mean? So it's
that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to get through it, because once I realized that the only way for me to enjoy it and fully, because I have a problem where I need to understand the scene in a very concrete way before I will let myself move on from it. And so I just had to read, and I finished it this morning half an hour before the recording started, because I was like, I had to sit and read, like, my boyfriend and I would watch an episode of something, and then at 7:30 I'd be like, I'm going to bed now because I need to go read this book, and I'd be in bed listening to it at 2.2, 2.5 speed and reading it at the same time, and just like as much as I could.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't, like, normally it's easy to get through a book like this, especially given the 2 weeks Will gave me, because I can just, on walks, in a car, like, while I'm driving, doing groceries, cooking, any of that, I can just listen, and I couldn't for this. So yeah, listening, if you can listen to it, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'd highly suggest.
The fact that I like it so much, despite the fact how much time I had to carve out just to get through it, like, part of reading this was a job because I couldn't do it at my leisure. There was a time limit and I had to finish it. So the fact that I like it as much as I do is a real testament to the book itself.
Yeah.
The odds were stacked against it.
It was such like just like listening to pleasant music was the feeling I had to it so often, and that I would just let it be. I know it probably will annoy some people, but I liked how the narrator chews and swallows and makes mouth noises because it feels so real.
I love that he is acting the scene. It's a recording of when he is doing a one-man theater, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
it really is, and that's why. Even getting to the point where I was like, oh, I'm going to have to read this with my eyes, I continued listening to it because his acting and performance is so excellent. Like, he'll stop and he'll, like, nom, 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 and like, chew the middle of the sentence as the character might do it, especially when he's playing, like, an older, very proper, like, Tom, we need to, like, it's just,
it's great.
All of a sudden he sounds like he has jowls. Yes, all of a sudden he sounds like he has jowls. And part of it is, I think they said this voice actor, I think he played, there was a play version, and he was one of the actors from that. So I think he comes from a stage acting background, which makes a lot of these mannerisms fit in. And
that makes so much sense.
Yeah. It's great.
And his reading of all the characters is just so spot on as my headcanon would have pictured it.
I think we should have...
nails the voice every single time.
I do think we need to have one more version of the audiobook, which is the Lindbergh edition. I think you would read this book great with all the different voices.
Copyright.
Okay. The last character to talk about before we talk about the end, I think, is Jane Seymour. We don't need to... We've already talked about her a little bit, but what's great is that you're introduced in Anne's household to, like, this little mousy gray girl that nobody really likes. And then at one point, Cromwell's like, oh, what's your name? She's like, Jane Seymour. And you're like, oh, that's... he said the thing. And
Wolf Hall!
And the thing is that I loved her portrayal as, like, very mousy, but also, like, she knows what the worth of being a spy is. Like, and I like that dichotomy of, like, she is the plain Jane virginal one, but she's not dumb. She is very much her own person. And I really... I don't ship them together because of age differences, but I did want them to keep having really wholesome interactions where they understand how intelligent the other is.
I thought at first he was going to be like, maybe her for my son, for Gregory, or for Richard, or for Rafe, or something like that. And then when he was like, there's this point where she, like, puts her hand on him, like, in a friendly gesture, because they're having a conversation, and he's like, Liz, take your hand off me. And I was like, ew, Cromwell, ew. Because later in that scene, he was like, her hand was a child's hand. And I was like,
maybe he meant
my
Liz.
boy.
Maybe he
Why
meant
do you
Liz.
betray me so?
I think maybe he meant Liz, as in it felt like Liz was the one putting his hand on her when Jane Seymour put the hand on him.
Well, no, what he was saying is, let me go. I want to be free to pursue her.
That's what I thought as well, but I'm saying an alternate interpretation that keeps him as bestest boy is...
No, but by their societal standards, it wouldn't be that inappropriate. Yes. It was of the time. We
already had an older guy marrying a 14-year-old that he was super happy about, so, like... Unfortunately, like, so nobody in society would have been like, because, like, there's that Rochford character I mentioned before. I was like, I know who you actually like, and I was like, who does he like? I don't know who he likes, because again, this whole time I've been like, oh, he wants Jane for someone in his family, and then she was like, you want that Jane Seymour, and I was like, what?
Again, I just like any female character who's like, oh, you're intelligent, like. Like that recognizes his intelligence. I think that's like, and he views as intelligent. I just find that so cute.
I'm like, power couple, let's go.
Yeah.
I also like how she made he gives her a gift at an earlier point, and he wraps it in nice fabric, and she takes the fabric and lines her sleeves with it, and she calls it her Cromwell sleeves, and I love that. Like, it's just such a move to be like, and so, like, I really enjoyed Jane as a character. You think, again, this book is called Wolf Hall, and you think it is going to deal with Wolf Hall. No, you just hear about some of the stuff that's happening tangentially. It should have been called something else.
Pious Friars.
This is just shamelessly sequel baiting.
Yes, shamelessly.
That's the other thing is I'm so curious to see how that plays out, because we know Jane Seymour gets married and dies. And so Cromwell to have this relationship with her. Like, I literally finished the book last night and was like, I really want to start on the next one because I know shit is about to go down. I know the next book is like 16 hours versus the 20 that this was. Like, let's do it. Ooh. I may have to move around some stuff next month so we can read it faster. I was telling Lindbergh.
Honestly, I'm probably going to start it so that I can, like,
I'll talk with you guys after we finish about trying to get it done earlier.
I really prefer not reading these on a packed schedule because I just want to enjoy.
Yeah. Okay. And then the ending of the book is very abrupt. Basically speaking, Anne has had her second child, and it's a girl. Or does she actually have it?
No, it's a miscarriage. And we don't actually ever know what the sex was. The book doesn't come down.
a miscarriage, and like, okay, women, you only get 2 shots. But and so that's kind of what's happening there.
She miscarries, and she's furious because Mary, her sister,
pregnant.
is also pregnant again.
Right. Oh, and the other thing is that this time when she was pregnant, the king was hitting on sex on one of her cousins, because the patriarchs in her family were like, well, better keep it close if we can't have Mary around.
Yeah, let's whore out all the women. What women do we still have?
It's crazy. And so by this point, Cromwell and Henry are buds. Henry just keeps he A, likes Cromwell, and B, Cromwell is a fixer, so he keeps putting him in charge of like Parliament and getting the law of supremacy passed and things like that. And there's
Cromwell
economy.
is the most valued person Henry has. There is one point where Cromwell is ill, and he notes that Henry comes to see him and sit at his bedside when he's sick. But when Anne was sick with the sweats, Henry fled to another castle to ward off sickness.
Yeah, it was such a moment of like, no, he really does like Cromwell. Like, they're buds in his mind.
But also, the note that was it John, Alice, or Meg in his house? One of the women in his house was like, oh, he likes you, but he's also scared of you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, are we laying the groundwork for great fears down the line?
Wait a minute, this man is a much more capable ruler in every single way.
Well, and the other thing is that Cromwell looks like a murderer, a bunch of people say. And so how much of like his withholding emotionally is Henry kind of interested in to a certain extent, because he doesn't quite know how to deal with that. Is
at one point, one of the barons, he tries to insult Cromwell, and he's like, you're such a person. Yeah, you're such a person, Cromwell. And you really get this sense of Cromwell's magnificence. He is so stark, you just cannot see past him. He is more intelligent than anyone else at court. He is more well learned than anyone else. He speaks more languages. He just knows economics. He knows the law. He knows politics. He is clever to keep his mouth shut when it benefits him. He is such a staggering person.
Like, no wonder Henry finds him intimidating.
Yeah, no wonder Henry would be dependent on, but also deeply intimidated by him.
Exactly. And a character we haven't mentioned, but this made me think of it because it is the book juxtaposes from the start Cromwell against Stephen Gardiner. The first scene we get with Cromwell post him being a child and running off to war is him and Stephen Gardiner. And the idea is Stephen Gardiner is a bastard also of royal blood, but he's a bastard that was raised by like wool merchants. And so in a lot of ways has a similar background to Cromwell in this like scrappy, I gotta rise up, I gotta be in the... It's if you've seen the musical Hamilton, Cromwell's Hamilton, and this guy is... what's his name? The guy who kills him. But
I haven't watched it.
Anyway, and these two are set up that way where they both kind of want... Like, and Gardiner wants it way more. He wants position, power, and stuff way more, at least verbally, way more than Cromwell does. And there's a point where Cromwell goes above him. So, like, he's always just pissed that Cromwell is a step above him. And Wolsey's, despite the fact that he's Wolsey's secretary, Cromwell's the one he talks to at night. And, they just, like, he thinks he's better than Cromwell because he is of a higher birth.
Better blood. But he just can't. He's not as much of a person. He's just not as good. And it kind of... Yeah, it's excellent. It's great.
There's two things that I think are kind of interesting. One is that Henry keeps trying to get Cromwell to be like, you're kind of part of those royal Cromwell families from a while ago. And Cromwell's like, no, that's not me. That's not me.
that's
And Henry's
not
like,
me,
it would be a lot easier though if it was. And Cromwell's like, no. And then there's a moment I started talking about this earlier, and then I got interrupted by women. But one of the other things that really helped solidify Henry's character to me is at one point in this, Henry's like, so whoever mentioned that I haven't given you any gifts, I'm going to give you a gift to show my appreciation. And it's like, that's the thing, is that Henry isn't necessarily narcissistic. He just doesn't necessarily think about others very much. And so like when he noticed like, oh yeah, no, Henry Cromwell I really like, I haven't shown that, I'm going to show that now. You know, there is a level to Henry that is just sort of innocent in a bad way.
He's a child.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And the thing when a child is a king in a grown man's body is that bad things happen.
It's bad for everyone else.
A child is inconsistent. A child is self-centered, not out of malice, but because they are the center of their universe.
And a lot of their selfishness comes from thoughtlessness, which 100% Henry. Also, Aaron Burr was the other historical figure. Aaron Burr, sir, is the other.
She was making a Bill Burr
about.
joke. Also that in there. And so the book, I thought the book was going to end with Anne's beheading, and then as we got longer, I was like, oh, we're not going to get there. Maybe it's Anne's original trial, and we still don't get there. And what it ends with actually is Thomas More.
More, which is not at all. I thought maybe it was going to be something with Gardner, since we started with him. Like, and this is where the note I made before, and then I'll let Will finish, that this book goes, your narrative expectations, fuck them.
Toss them in the bin. Out with them. Fuck you.
So continue, Will, about how you think it's gonna.
Well, because again, you think, because those are the big moments. Those are the big moments in the Henry VIII story. But the thing is that Thomas More from the beginning has also been set up as a contrast to Cromwell, because Cromwell, grew up in his household like a little bit, and he saw him as a child. And there's a point early on where he says, like, the more of the world I have learned, I have turned away from the rigidness of religiosity, and More has turned more towards it. How can that be? So what's happening at this point is that everybody's having to take an oath to show that, like, the right of supremacy, Henry's better than the Pope or whatever, or the minister in Rome, I think they call him. And More won't sign it, and he won't say why he won't sign it. And everybody's like, you should just sign it already. Like, we always knew this was going to be a problem, but like, you're a traitor if you don't sign it. And he's like, well, I'm not saying I'm a traitor, but I'm not going to say I'm signing it. So they put him in the Tower of London, and he just gets increasingly old and kind of lonely. And there's like a real sense of like melancholy, because everybody just wants him to sign the stupid thing, and he won't. And the reason the book gives is A, he's kind of just stuck in his ways, but B, he has like a network of people, of respected scholars in Europe and stuff, and he doesn't want to lose face with them, essentially, is the reason given by the book. And him and Cromwell eventually have this like very hard, this very intense conversation where Cromwell's like, just do it. You can go home. Your wife will feed you something. It will be great. And Cromwell's like, oh, I meant for the fire.
You
whatever.
see your favorite daughter.
You see your favorite daughter, who you like more than your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit weirdly. And then there's also a point, I don't remember if it's in the same scene or another scene, where Cromwell's like, well, don't do whatever, have mercy. And he's like, the mercy you gave all of the people you tortured, like, you have done horrible things. And I am trying to get you off the hook for some reason. Just help me out here, bro. And More is like, I can't, whatever. And it's such an emotional kind of like moment and you really feel for More, even though More has done all these things. He did them off screen, so it's harder to feel.
Yeah, but you kind of understand what is at stake when he will go to his execution.
Yeah.
For this.
Again, I think it's one of the ways that the book is very much like, people are religious, but they're also practical about it. And it's also one of these things where like Cromwell thought he could get him off at the last minute, but then at the last minute there's some kind of a weird change that happens, and he's like, oh shit, Henry's gonna be in a bad mood, I can't get you off.
Nope.
And they ensnare him in a way that's like not really that unethical. It's usually portrayed as like, oh, the person told, they snitched, but here it's like, well, he did kind of say the thing because he didn't like the guy he was talking to. And that's kind of his downfall. And like that's how the book ends. I literally like I was listening. There was a pause, and then the author said, "No, in Valentine's, whatever the date is," and I was like, "Whoa, that's it? We're done?"
Yep, it's so sudden. There's this like
this whole book is just one massive sequel bait.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's like Thomas More dies. He's not there. He doesn't watch it. He's talking to his ward, and he's like, "Are you happy with the poor lady you married?" And he was like, "Yes, no man was ever happier." And then it's literally, he's like, "Before we go here," he makes a dot and a margin, draws a long arrow across the page. "Now here, before we go to Winchester, we have time to spare, and I think, and what I think is, Rafe, we shall visit the Seymours." He writes it down. Early September, 5 days, Wolf Hall. And that's just how it fucking ends. And you're just like,
You're like, what?
She was...
And there's also some moments. So like, there's a part a little bit earlier where he moves from Pious Friars to a new place because there aren't going to be any children there. In Texas, I don't know. And so, like, looking back, you're like, oh, okay, that was him moving on to the next section of his life. But in the moment, you're like, what was that? Like, that was great, but that was a lot of foreplay for nothing.
For nothing. We didn't get to the thing. It's called Wolf Hall. Like, and I just see Mantel cackling in the background. Like, oh, you thought.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
The evil writer lady, she's like, haha, they're gonna have to keep reading now.
I so enjoyed this book. I'm so besotted with it. This was like just one of the best things we've read. And I understand if you're not on the vibe of this book, if you don't want daily life in Tudor England, that like, yeah, I understand why you don't like it, but I was here for it, and I was just so here for it. That being said, if I ever reread it, I would probably just skip to certain scenes and reread those. Like, I don't know that I would ever go fully through it again.
If I did it...
The thing with the book is that it's so long, you're going to forget things. So you're going to want to go through it again because you'll be like, oh, it's this scene. Oh, I like this scene. And you're like, what's going to happen next? I don't remember.
Honestly, if I listened to it again, it would be in like a comfort... You know, like how you have shows where you know what happens, so like the teeth is out, so it can just be that comforting thing you have in the background. And I think that is how I would... like listen to it, or you know, where I don't need all of the tiny details. I've got the overall context of it. But yeah, it was a good time. It was in a lot of ways cozy. And I'll say that.
It is. Like, I was thinking about that too. I was like, this is going to be a weird thing, and I don't think they're going to agree, but it's cozy in that slice of life. It is.
It is so weird.
It's super cozy.
And like, again, we haven't mentioned it, but it's so fucking funny. It's like, this book works because she's so talented and funny and writes dialogue so well.
The wit is knife sharp.
So I did screenshot a particular scene that I thought highlighted and also if you listen to the audiobook narrator's reading of the scene, it's excellent. So this is after, this is when the Cardinal people are kind of talking shit about the Cardinal. And so the Cardinal has received the complaints with a supreme hauteur. He has grimly noted in his file the names of the complainers. Then he has taken out... did I do that badly? I think I missed something. But... Rafe had gone to visit him, and he goes, "I assured him," Rafe says, "of your respect, your reverence, your desire to be at his, commandment," that's Cromwell, "more or less." And what did he say? He said, He laughs. Was that his tone? It was his tone. And his grim nod? Yes. Very well. I'll dry my tears. And it's just this thing where like so much is given from the dialogue that you understand that he has done an affectation of the Cardinal's manner, and you as the reader, because you spent so much time with the Cardinal, it just works, but there's so little words in the scene. It is just excellent.
There's one description she uses early on of like the streets were filled with the unrepentant with the evidence of the previous night's sins, and she's talking about vomit, and you're like, that's such a funny way to describe it. Like, there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of wit and character, and like, again, she's so insanely talented. It's too bad she's not with us anymore.
Yeah.
She's not? I didn't even look
At
into that.
least, yeah, no, she died 2 years after she wrote the final book in this trilogy.
Oh,
This is-
wow. So
this
it really
is
it
her
was
magnum
her magnum
opus.
opus.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
it is.
The third
Yeah,
book
it
took
is.
8 years to write, apparently. So we're lucky we
Oh,
got
wow.
it. We are not going to be as lucky with Martin.
But she beat Martin out of the park, let's face it.
Any last words? Do we miss anything, Lindbergh? Because you are the true scholar here of this book.
No, I completely respect everyone who didn't like this book, because if you look at it with a modern eye and you expect books to give you a certain easy entertainment, you expect it to follow certain norms, this book just doesn't. It is the weird coincidental movements of court life for 800 pages.
Which is a
And
lot
that's
of
not
pages.
it's not gonna be everyone's cup of tea. We could cut so much out just if we wanted to get only Cromwell's story. But that is not what the author wanted, and it's not what I want, so yeah.
All right, Maria,
I
last
just
word.
want to hear.
Last word, it's interesting. We just published our Emily Wilde video, and I was rewatching that, and how much, like, on an objective level I have problems with that book, but how much just on the subjective level I was like, tee-hee-hee, kicking my feet, having a great time. And it is weird in a lot of ways. I had a similar experience with this book where I was like, my boy Cromwell, oh, look at him doing so good, you're doing so good, which just means I'm going to be so upset in book 3.
Yeah, oh my god, I'm gonna
be
die.
heartbroken. Yeah.
Yes.
Ugh.
And so it's just like, I don't think it's a book for everyone, and it's similar to those times where we've read books where Will just hasn't liked it and he's gone, yeah, this just wasn't for me. The version of this I would have wanted would have made it a completely different story, and this is for me and what I want and the kinds of things I like out of historical fiction. As someone who has read a ton of like textbooks, it's like
we're
reading
all
the textbook
three
with
history
color.
nerds. Yeah, we're all three history
Yeah.
nerds who will sit down and read a Wikipedia article or a textbook for way too long. So, like, there's an extent to
Yeah.
which this is, like, made for us, and I've always liked the Henry VIII.
This is a historical textbook, except that there's pictures and they're colored in, and it's...
And
dialogue. Yeah, it's totally true.
Yeah.
All right.
and it has jokes.
All right. We love you all, our parasocial darlings.
bye.
Bye!